Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us into the world of plants, not just as scenery or salad, but as silent, sensing and surprisingly clever beings. This is a story not of thunder or spectacle, but of stillness, of roots that seek, leaves that listen, and lives unfolding so slowly we often forget they're alive at all. But before you settle in and get cozy, I'd love if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly find these quiet explorations enjoyable. And when you're ready, leave a comment to let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always such a joy to see all the places we gather from, each in our own little slice of time. Now, feel free to dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a soft background hum, and let's gently begin our journey into the green and leafy unknown. And if your mind begins to wander, that's perfectly fine. Let it drift. We'll still be here, quietly unfolding the story, just outside your window, or perhaps quietly tucked in the corners of your living room. There are beings growing in silence. They don't move the way we do. They don't speak, they don't gesture, and yet they are alive, aware and listening in ways we're only beginning to understand. A single blade of grass, a potted fern, the sprawling crown of an old oak, each is part of a hidden network of sensing, signalling, and surviving. They live at a pace slower than dreams, in a language too quiet for ears. But if you listen closely, not with your ears, but with your attention, they begin to reveal something astonishing. You're surrounded always by a living green presence. Maybe you pass it on your walk to work, a row of trees whose names you've never learned, or maybe you sip your tea in the morning, not thinking about the leaf that once curled in the sun to make it. Maybe there's a little spider plant sitting near your desk, just quietly growing, adjusting its leaves ever so slightly, tasting the light. Plants are so much more than passive backdrops. They're not furniture in the garden of Earth. They're companions, and they've been here far, far longer than we have. They reach toward the sun. They twist toward moisture. They warn one another of danger, nurture their kin through underground channels, and somehow, without eyes or ears or a brain, they make decisions. Tiny ones, vital ones, ones that keep them alive, and sometimes even help others survive too. You might have noticed, when the world gets quiet, really quiet, plants somehow become more visible, not in movement, but in presence. In that moment when the breeze stills and the branches stop swaying, something seems to wait, and maybe that's when they notice you too. Tonight, we're going to step gently into that world. Not to dissect it or conquer it with definitions, but to drift beside it. To explore how plants sense their surroundings, how they remember, how they speak to each other. Not with mouths, but with light, chemicals, and time. Let's not rush. Let the thoughts come like petals falling. This isn't a race toward understanding, it's a stroll, slow, observant, and deeply green. So, close your eyes if you'd like, or just let them soften, half open. The leaves are already waiting, the roots have already begun to reach. You don't need to catch up, you're already here, let's begin. Let's take another slow breath together, in and out. You don't need to follow anything too closely tonight. There's no quiz, no fast facts, no rush to get somewhere. Just a gentle unfolding, like a fern slowly uncoiling from its centre. This isn't a story about solving a mystery, it's about quietly sitting with one. Not every question has to be answered right away. Some are better left to breathe, to settle into the soft soil of thought and sprout when they're ready. And plants are, perhaps, the perfect companions for that kind of wonder. When we think of intelligent life, we often picture movement, eyes darting, limbs grasping, maybe a brain pulsing with thoughts as quick and electric as a storm. But what if intelligence could be still? What if awareness didn't shout or sparkle but lingered, quiet and constant, like dew on a leaf at dawn? Plants don't rush, they don't panic, they don't leap at every change in the weather. Instead, they feel the shift in daylight slowly, like the fading of a song. They adjust their routines to the season, not the second. Their clocks are old ones, tuned to sunrises, moonlight and memory. In that slowness, there's something peaceful, a kind of wisdom in taking your time. It's easy to forget in our buzzing world that slower doesn't mean simpler, that stillness doesn't mean silence, and that something can be deeply alive even if it's not moving at a pace we notice. Tonight, we'll try to match that pace, gently. With no need to chase or categorize or explain too much, we'll let the rhythms of roots and leaves guide our tempo, like a tree swaying with the wind instead of resisting it. This exploration will flow, bend, and sometimes pause without warning. You might find your thoughts drifting too, and that's completely okay. Let them. We're not here to hold on tightly. We're here to listen softly. You'll hear about how plants see light without eyes, how they hear vibrations, how they remember a touch. But we'll explore it all as if we were walking through a quiet forest, pausing here, stepping lightly there, never in a rush. There may be surprises, strange ones, beautiful ones. A plant that can scream in ultrasound, another that can warn its neighbours of danger, one that remembers what happened days ago, and roots, tiny root tips, that seem to know which way to turn as if they're making up their minds. But we won't shout about it, we'll just notice, the same way a leaf might notice the first warm breeze of spring. So, if you feel your breathing slowing, or your body getting heavier, that's a good sign. You're starting to match the rhythm we're aiming for, the pace of photosynthesis and unfolding petals. We're so used to speed, to stimulation, to noise. But tonight, let the leaves remind you that not all life needs to be loud to be full, that not all communication needs words, and that curiosity can whisper too. The plants are waiting, and they don't mind the time it takes. Let's linger here for a moment. Not in a rush, not even to move forward, just in stillness. The kind of stillness you might feel when lying in a quiet field, watching the tips of tall grasses sway ever so gently with the evening breeze. Nothing dramatic, just presence, a slow breath, a grounded feeling. So, why plants? Why spend our evening with them, of all things? Why now? Perhaps because we rarely do. Because in the noise of our days, we often overlook the silent ones. We don't think of plants as doing much. They don't blink or pace or raise their voices. They don't cry out when hurt or run when scared. Their reactions live in hours and days, not in split seconds. And in our human world, where fast equals smart and loud equals important, plants often fade into the backdrop. Stillness has a way of being misunderstood. A plant that doesn't flee danger might seem defenseless. A tree that takes a century to mature might seem inert. But what if that stillness isn't absence? What if it's strategy? Over the last few decades, scientists have started asking these questions more seriously. And what they've uncovered feels like opening a door into a parallel world. A world that's always been there, green, rooted, patient, but largely invisible to us. Not because it hides, but because we've never been taught to see it. In the 1970s, researchers noticed that some plants could learn, not metaphorically but functionally. They could change their behaviour based on experience. Later we found that plants can respond to sound waves, even specific frequencies. They can count light exposures, remember past conditions and share warnings through invisible chemical plumes, or through underground threads of fungi. Trees send sugar to their sick neighbours. A bean plant can lean toward a sound. A flower might close when touched, but only the first few times. After that, if no harm comes, it stops bothering to react. That's not just reaction, that's adaptation. And maybe, just maybe, that's something we've overlooked for too long. We've been so focused on the speed of thought, the spark of neurons, the drama of decision-making, that we forgot to consider a different kind of intelligence, one that lives in the slowness, in repetition, in survival through quiet, stubborn perseverance. And in a time where our lives feel ever more hectic, maybe that's exactly why we need to come back to the plants. They don't compete for our attention. They don't refresh every 5 seconds. They don't judge. They just grow quietly toward the light, toward water, toward balance. This isn't just about botany. It's about seeing the world more fully. It's about recognizing that intelligence may take many forms, not all of them like ours. It's about remembering that the world is bigger than the human pace. So as you listen tonight, or drift in and out of sleep, you might think of the tree outside your window differently, not as decor, but as a witness, as a listener, as a being that knows the turning of the sun, the shifts in the air, and the meaning of rain long before the clouds have fully gathered. Why plants? Because they are quietly remarkable. And why now? Because maybe in a world that's constantly urging us to hurry, there's something deeply healing about spending time with a life form that never does. Let's begin at first light. Imagine the early morning sun filtering through a window, brushing gently across the leaves of a houseplant on the sill. To us, it's just sunlight, warmth, a new day. But to that plant, it's everything. It's breakfast. It's orientation. It's a signal from the sky that guides how to live the next few hours. You might think that because plants have no eyes, they can't really see, but they can. Not in the way you see, but in a way just as real, just as meaningful. They sense light through specialized proteins called photoreceptors, which are scattered throughout their cells like tiny silent watchmen. These receptors detect not only whether light is present, but how intense it is, what color it is, and even where it's coming from. Blue light, red light, far red light. To us, these are just different parts of the spectrum, but to a plant, each is a whisper from the environment. Blue light might tell it, the sun is rising. Red light says, there's open sky above. And far red light, which filters through the shade of other leaves, warns, you're in someone's shadow. And plants listen. Oh, do they listen? They'll shift their growth depending on what these colours are telling them. They'll lean toward the light. A behaviour called phototropism. If you've ever noticed a sunflower tilting its head toward the sun, you've seen it in action. It's not random. It's a calculated response to where the light is strongest, where energy is most available. And here's something even more lovely. Some flowers and leaves can track the sun as it moves across the sky. Not just once, but continually, throughout the day. This behaviour, called heliotropism, allows them to maximise light absorption. It's as if they're following a celestial companion, always turning toward the source of life. And at night, some of them turn back to face east, as if already preparing for tomorrow. Even seeds buried in darkness can sense which direction is up. Not because they see the light, but because they can detect its presence above. A sprouting seedling will curve its stem, even underground toward the surface, reaching before it ever glimpses the sun. All of this happens without eyes, without nerves, without a brain. But it does happen, slowly, consistently, precisely. And then, of course, there's the circadian rhythm, the plant's internal clock. Even in constant darkness, some plants still unfurl their leaves on schedule, bloom at their usual hour and rest at night. They're not waiting for the sun to tell them what to do. They remember, they anticipate, they see with time as much as they do with light. So next time you open the blinds in the morning, take a quiet glance at any plant nearby. It has already noticed. It's already moving, just too slowly for you to see in real time. But if you were to speed it up, watch it in time-lapse, you'd see a ballet of light-following limbs and unfolding petals, all coordinated in silence. They don't need sight to see, they need only light, time and patience. And perhaps, so do we. Now let's step gently away from the sun and move into something quieter. something we rarely think about unless we bump into it. Touch. We tend to think of touch as a distinctly animal thing. Fingers brushing fabric, feet pressing against the ground. But touch is not reserved for skin. And in the plant world, it's a sense both subtle and profound. You might already know the shyest plant of all, Mimosa pudica. If you gently stroke its feathery leaves, they curl inward almost immediately like a startled sigh. Touch it again, and it folds tighter. It's not being rude, it's reacting in real time to your presence. This kind of sensitivity is called thigmonasty, a movement in response to touch, not tied to direction. It's fast, too, at least by plant standards. Mimosa closes its leaves in seconds, as if reconsidering the openness it once offered. But other plants, less dramatic, still feel. Climbing vines like morning glories or peas use thigmotropism, directional growth in response to physical contact. You'll see them curl around fences, wires, nearby branches. They don't grow randomly. They feel their way upward, testing what they encounter and adjusting their path. It's not unlike a blindfolded hand reaching into the dark, not with fear, but with trust. One tendril brushing lightly forward, deciding whether this structure will support a future stretch of green, and then there's gravity, something we rarely notice until we fall. But plants, they always know which way is down. Their roots respond to gravitropism, growing downward deep into the soil, while shoots respond oppositely, lifting themselves toward the air and light. If you tilt a sprouting seedling sideways, it won't just continue in that direction. It will pause and begin to curve. Shoots will bend upward again. Roots will turn back toward the earth. But how? Inside the tips of both roots and stems, there are tiny structures called statoliths, dense, starch-filled bodies that settle under the pull of gravity, like microscopic pebbles in a snow globe. As they shift, they inform the plant which direction is down, allowing growth to reorient itself. No central command, no eyes looking for the horizon, just a quiet internal compass. Even if the plant is flipped upside down, these statoliths start rolling, and new growth changes course, slowly, gently, but with purpose. Touch, pressure, gravity, all invisible forces. Yet to a plant, they're not abstract, they're lived experience, constant companions in every moment of its slow sensing life. In the rainforest, strangler figs wrap themselves around host trees, responding to contours. In your backyard, tomato plants brush against a stake and begin to adjust their trajectory. Every contact tells a story. And unlike us, plants never stop touching their world. They're rooted in it. They feel the pull of gravity in every cell, the brush of a breeze across their leaves, the gentle patter of a raindrop on their surface. And beneath the soil, roots are touching everything: stones, fungi, other roots, pockets of moisture, listening with their bodies to the shape of their world. No nerves, no fingertips, but touch nonetheless. And if you sit still long enough beside a growing vine, you might even begin to feel as though it's reaching toward you. Not with awareness like ours, but with a kind of slow, embodied question. Is this the way? Should I grow here? Can I trust this space? We tend to think of ourselves as the ones doing the noticing. But plants have been noticing longer than we've had words for it. And sometimes, all they need to feel the world is the quiet strength of gravity and the whisper of touch. Now let's drift into an even quieter realm, one where sound itself becomes invisible again. You may never have thought of a plant as listening. After all, they don't have ears, no eardrums, no cochleas, no nervous systems to interpret sound waves the way animals do. And yet the air is full of vibrations, a bee's wings, the low murmur of wind, a footstep on soft earth, a caterpillar's chew. To us, it's background noise. But to some plants, these small disturbances in the air may be more than just a breeze. They might be information. Let's begin with something surprising. In recent years, scientists discovered that some plants respond to sound. Not metaphorically, literally. In one experiment, researchers exposed plant roots to the sound of flowing water. Not moisture in the soil, just the sound of water, and the roots grew toward it. There was no liquid to touch, no chemical to sense, just vibration. Somehow, the roots heard the signal and followed the sound as if it were a trail. That alone is remarkable, but it goes further. Another study exposed plants to the sound of a caterpillar munching on leaves, just a recording. No real caterpillars present, and in response, the plants ramped up their chemical defences, as if to say, "We've heard this danger before. We remember." They couldn't see the threat, couldn't smell it, but the sound was enough. And then there are the plants that speak. In 2019, researchers recorded stressed plants, tomatoes and tobacco, undergoing drought or physical injury. They discovered that these plants emit ultrasonic clicks, sharp, rapid bursts of sound too high for human ears to detect. If you were standing nearby, you'd hear nothing. But with sensitive microphones, you discover a secret song of distress. Not a wail or a groan, but a high-pitched pulse, a coded signal in the dark. It's not entirely clear yet what these ultrasonic emissions mean, or whether other plants hear and react to them. But it suggests a kind of quiet broadcast, a warning, a plant under stress sending out sound like ripples on a still pond. Even the vibrations of music have been studied. While the science here is still young and full of caveats, some researchers suggest that plants may respond differently to different types of rhythmic sound. Perhaps it's not so much about melody, but about motion, about rhythm, about vibration itself. After all, sound is movement. It is air in motion, energy without form, and plants are surrounded by it, touched by it, shaken gently or otherwise by every passing wave. They are not deaf, they are simply listening in a different register. The base of a tree may resonate slightly in a thunderstorm. A vine may stiffen ever so subtly when a predator draws near. A leaf may tremble from more than just the wind. Of course, none of this implies consciousness in the way we know it. A plant doesn't hear a violin and weep. But it may feel the pattern of pressure and respond, and that too is a kind of awareness, a low-frequency wisdom. It makes you wonder. When you hum softly in a garden, when the rain drums on the roof of a greenhouse, when you speak gently to your plants, not out of superstition but out of care, maybe, just maybe, they notice. Not as you do, not with names or notes, but with a slight shift, a chemical signal, a tiny change in growth. Not everything that listens needs ears. Some things sway instead. Now imagine you're in a garden just after a summer rain. There's a scent in the air. Earthy, green, slightly sweet. It's the smell of leaves breathing again, of soil releasing its damp stories, of blossoms leaning into the light. But underneath that pleasant fragrance, something else may be happening, a conversation. Not for your ears, not even for your nose, but for the plants. You see, plants talk to each other. They just do it chemically. When a leaf is wounded, say, by an insect's bite, it doesn't merely patch the wound and move on. No, it releases a message, a volatile organic compound, or virus, that drifts invisibly through the air. It's a kind of alarm, like a puff of scented smoke telling nearby plants, "I'm under attack." And nearby plants, they listen. They don't run, of course, but many will begin preparing chemical defences, building up bitter compounds, or stiffening their tissues, or producing enzymes that make them less appetizing. Some even attract predators of the very insects feeding on them. It's not reactive, it's preemptive, as if hearing the cry of a neighbour prompts them to armour up. Take the case of acacia trees on the African savannah. When giraffes begin munching on their leaves, the trees don't just stand there. Within minutes, they release ethylene gas into the air. a signal to neighbouring trees downwind. Those trees respond by increasing tannins in their leaves, making them tougher and less tasty. Giraffes, in turn, often learn to feed upwind to avoid triggering the alert system. It's chemical warfare, but it's also kinship, survival, and maybe even a form of memory. Each compound released is specific. It's not just a generic cry for help, it's a tailored message. The plant can tell its neighbours whether the threat is a fungus, a beetle, a drought. And the neighbours, depending on the species, might respond differently. Like a whispered warning passed through a leafy crowd. What's most remarkable is that these compounds don't have to travel far. Some plants respond even before the smell reaches them because their leaves are touching, connected by proximity and time. In some cases, the chemicals travel through root networks or via fungal filaments, acting like underground telegram wires. And then there's the mimicry. Some parasitic plants can smell nearby hosts before attaching. Others can sense chemical cues in the air to know which direction to grow. Dodder vines, for example, seem to sniff out tomato plants with alarming precision, twisting their way toward the most promising meal. Even seeds respond to scent. Studies have shown that certain seeds will germinate faster when they detect chemical cues from neighbouring plants that suggest favourable conditions. So much, without a nose, without lungs, without breath in the way we know it. Just molecules, drifting, signals sent and received. And while we might call it smell, for plants it's not a conscious sense, it's a way of being in the world, a language written in scent and translated by cells. Next time you catch the fragrance of cut grass, or the sweetness of jasmine in the evening, know that there's a deeper layer beneath it all. A message being passed. A code, invisible but powerful, helping plants adapt, defend and respond to life around them. They are not mute, they are whispering. We've just been too loud to notice. Let's stay here a while in the quiet rhythm of the garden. You may have noticed, if you've ever kept a houseplant near a sunny window, that its leaves begin to move as the day progresses. At dawn they reach upward, stretching like a cat awakening from slumber. By dusk they may lower, folding in softly, almost like breathing. This isn't a coincidence. It's not a reaction to the light outside, at least not entirely. It's something deeper, something built into the plant itself, an inner rhythm, a memory of time. Plants, just like animals, have circadian clocks, internal timekeepers that help them anticipate the world. The word circadian comes from the Latin circa diem, about a day. It's the rhythm of roughly 24 hours that governs sleep and wakefulness in us, and leaf movement and flowering in them. But where we rely on eyes and alarm clocks, plants carry time in their cells, ticking silently, night and day. Even in complete darkness, many plants continue to follow their daily routines. They still open leaves at dawn, still prepare for photosynthesis, still close up at night. It's not that they see the sun rise, it's that they expect it. Their rhythm is so reliable that scientists once used bean plants to prove that something internal, not external, was driving their cycles. In a completely dark room, the leaves kept moving, up during the day, down during the night, despite never seeing light. That was the clue. Plants don't just respond to time, they carry it. Inside their cells, molecular mechanisms function like gears in a delicate timepiece. Proteins rise and fall in waves, turning on certain genes and turning others off. The timing of these shifts regulates when a plant flowers, when it opens its stomata to breathe, when it releases scents to attract pollinators. A sunflower doesn't just follow the sun, it follows its own sun, its own clock, which just happens to sync with the sky above. And these rhythms aren't just aesthetic, they're essential. Opening stomata to absorb carbon dioxide during the day, that's photosynthesis. But keep them open too long and the plant loses water, so it times its breaths. coordinates with humidity, with temperature, with light. Some plants even time their nectar release to match the active hours of their preferred pollinators. If a bee is most active in the morning, the plant's clock nudges the sweet reward into readiness just after sunrise. A perfect, wordless appointment. And if you were to shift that schedule, say, by moving the plant across time zones, it would lag for a while, just like you, a little jet-lagged, its internal clock out of sync. But give it a few days and it recalibrates, because time lives in its body, not just outside it. This sense of rhythm extends beyond single plants. In a forest, a whole community might respond to changes in day length with remarkable coordination. Trees may drop their leaves at nearly the same time, flower in synchrony, or shift their chemistry in harmony with the season, as if the entire forest were breathing in unison. And here's something humbling. Our own circadian systems aren't so different. The genes involved in plant clocks and animal clocks share surprising similarities. Different rhythms, same music. So, as you wind down for bed tonight, perhaps with soft lamplight or the hush of distant crickets, know that the plants around you are settling in too, quietly marking the end of day, preparing for rest, keeping time in a way that's older than sleep itself. They don't count hours, they remember them. Now let's turn to a familiar friend, one whose bright yellow face seems to smile at the sky. A plant so iconic it feels almost human in its warmth and cheer. The sunflower. You've seen them before in fields or gardens, tall, golden and gently swaying. But what you may not have seen is what they're doing, hour by hour, day by day. Because sunflowers don't just stand still waiting for light. They follow it, literally. Young sunflowers track the sun across the sky each day, beginning their mornings facing east and slowly turning west as the sun arcs overhead. Then, during the night, they turn back east again, preparing to greet the morning once more. It's called heliotropism, and it's one of nature's quietest dances. But this motion isn't just mechanical, it's timed, coordinated, driven by internal rhythms that anticipate the sun's path before it even arrives. Inside each sunflower, cells on one side of the stem grow faster than those on the other, pushing the head to turn in that direction. Light stimulates these changes, but the plant doesn't simply react, it predicts. If you move the plant into constant light, it keeps the rhythm for a while, like a dancer still moving even after the music has stopped. That's its internal clock. The same circadian system we spoke about earlier, still ticking along. And here's the elegant part. Once the sunflower matures, this daily turning stops. The head fixes itself permanently eastward, the direction of the sunrise. Why? Because facing east warms the flower more quickly in the morning, making it more attractive to pollinators like bees. The sunflower doesn't just turn for fun, it does so to survive, to thrive, to optimize the sunlight it receives, to offer warmth to its visitors, all with no brain, no nerves, no conscious thought, just a remarkable ability to move with purpose. Even more astonishing is how this behaviour changes depending on light levels, temperature and age. Young plants move more, older ones settle. Cloudy days shift the rhythm slightly. Cool mornings slow the turn. It's not robotic, it's responsive, flexible. A kind of graceful adaptability that seems almost thoughtful in its precision. In a way, sunflowers embody the perfect metaphor for plant intelligence. Responsive, rhythmic, and rooted in their environment. They show that movement isn't always dramatic. That behaviour can be both visible and subtle. That intention doesn't need to be fast to be real. And beyond the mechanics, there's something comforting about their motion. Something human even. Perhaps it's the familiarity of greeting the sun in the morning. The slow, steady attention given to a source of life. The return each night to a place of rest. And the way, eventually, we all settle into our final orientation. Facing warmth, not with desperation, but with quiet acceptance. So next time you see a field of sunflowers, or even a single one in a vase, you might, Wonder what it has noticed, how many sunrises it has tracked, how many bees it has welcomed, how many adjustments it has made to live just a little better, a little more harmoniously, with the light. There's genius there, a quiet kind. And sometimes, the truest wisdom is simply knowing where to turn. Let's sink below the surface now. Beneath your feet, beneath the grass and the garden beds, beneath the crumbling leaves and the stepping stones, there's a world most of us never see. A world not empty, but dense. A living labyrinth of quiet movement, purposeful growth, and invisible touch. This is the realm of the roots. We often think of roots as anchors, passive structures that simply hold a plant in place. But in truth, they are explorers, navigators, strategists. And at the very tips of these roots, something remarkable happens. The root apex, the small zone at the very end of each root, isn't just a site of growth. It's a sensory hub, a place where the root feels its surroundings, not with nerves or neurons, but with cells tuned to pressure, moisture, temperature, and chemical gradients. As a root moves through soil, it doesn't barrel forward blindly. It hesitates, it tests, it pauses, it adjusts course, it chooses. Imagine being at the tip of a root. The world ahead is dark, dense, full of obstacles and opportunities. There might be a patch of nutrient-rich soil just a few millimeters away, or a rock wall, or the tangled territory of another plant. You don't have eyes, you don't have hands, but you can feel, and so you probe forward. The cells at the very tip send out chemical signals, detecting what's ahead. If conditions are favourable, the root will grow in that direction. If not, it curves gently, taking a different path. Not through brute force, but through negotiation. Each root tip operates almost independently. In a large plant, there may be thousands, each one making small local decisions. Some researchers have compared this behaviour to a decentralised brain, not because roots are conscious, but because their collective behaviour adds up to something that seems intelligent, and perhaps it is. In experiments, roots have been shown to avoid obstacles before touching them, to grow around barriers, to prefer certain nutrient sources, to bypass toxins, and all of this happens underground, in silence, through a choreography of tiny cellular adjustments. It's easy to overlook just how precise these movements are. Time-lapse photography reveals roots dancing slowly through the soil, twisting, pausing, redirecting, never aimless, always in search of something better, or safer, or just a little more possible. And while they move, they communicate with each other, with fungi, with microbes, sending messages back to the stem, up to the leaves, helping the plant respond to changing conditions. Some scientists even speculate that the root tip's sensing zone is functionally similar to a command centre, not in a centralised way like a brain, but more like a network of scouts, each reporting from the field. It's not decision-making as we know it. It's slower, softer, but real. The ancient Greeks once believed that the soul resided in the heart, then later in the brain. But Aristotle, in his earliest writings, considered the soul to be in the root, the starting point of life, the source of nourishment and motion. He might have been wrong in the details, but in his intuition, perhaps not entirely. So next time you walk across a patch of earth, pause for a moment. Beneath you, countless tiny minds are at work, not thinking as you do, but sensing, adapting, and shaping their path, each one deciding ever so quietly where to grow next. Let's stay below ground a little longer, because under the soil, hidden from sight, there is a network so vast, so quietly powerful, that it might be the closest thing the natural world has to the internet. It doesn't use wires, or satellites, or electricity in the way we know it. It uses fungi. This is the mycorrhizal web, a vast system of tiny fungal threads called hyphae that link the roots of plants together. Not just 2 or 3 plants, but sometimes entire forests, tree to tree, shrub to flower, grass to root, all connected by a hidden lacework of communication and exchange. The name comes from Greek, myx, meaning fungus, and rhiza, meaning root. Mycorrhizal fungi don't just live near roots, they merge with them. They wrap around them, thread inside them, become part of them. In return for sugars from the plant's photosynthesis, the fungi offer something precious. Minerals, nutrients, water. It's a trade, a partnership, but it's more than just a transaction. Through this underground web, plants can share information, not in words or symbols, but in molecules. A tree that's attacked by pests can release warning chemicals into the fungal network, subtle alerts that travel through the hyphae to other trees nearby. Those trees, in turn, can prepare their defences, sometimes days in advance. Incredibly, plants can also share resources. In times of stress, drought, injury, poor soil, larger or healthier trees have been observed sending carbon compounds to younger, struggling ones through this fungal network. It's as if the forest keeps a kind of ledger, helping those in need when the season turns harsh. Some researchers call the largest, oldest trees in this system mother trees. They are the hubs, the strongholds, the quiet giants that feed and shelter the saplings around them. Their roots, laced with fungal threads, act like arteries, not just drawing in life, but giving it away. Susan Simard, an ecologist who helped bring this idea into the scientific spotlight, spent years studying how trees interact underground. What she found was something profoundly cooperative. Not competitive, as once believed, but communal. This wood wide web doesn't just carry nutrients, it carries memory. If a tree survives a certain pathogen, it may send chemical clues through the network that help others resist it later. If a fire sweeps through, the regrowth patterns can be influenced by what the roots remember, by what the network holds. And the fungi, they're not passive bystanders. Different species of fungi form different kinds of relationships. Some are more generous, some more selective. Some form exclusive bonds with one plant, while others play the field. It's a marketplace, yes, but also a village. There's even evidence that plants can recognise kin, favouring relatives when distributing shared resources, sending more nutrients to those that share their genetics. Not always, not perfectly, but often enough to make you pause. In a way, the forest isn't just made of individual trees, it's made of connections, and beneath the quiet crunch of leaves and the still trunks reaching upward, there is a pulsing, humming, invisible web of life. Not frantic or electric, just present, old, patient, wise. So the next time you walk beneath a forest canopy, think of the roots stretching out around you, not just into the soil, but toward one another, whispering, sharing, remembering. You're not walking on dirt, you're walking on memory. Let's stay here, just below the surface, where the roots continue to stretch and twist like soft underground fingers. We've already seen how plants use fungal networks to communicate, but they also speak in another way, directly, root to root. And their language? Chemicals. Invisible, precise, and ancient. Roots don't merely grow and absorb. They release. A constant stream of molecules leaks from their tips and sides. Organic acids, sugars, amino acids, enzymes, signalling compounds. Some of these are for self-care, helping the plant absorb nutrients or maintain a healthy microbial neighbourhood. But many of them are messages. When a root encounters another root, it doesn't have eyes to see who it's meeting. It has only chemistry. And from just a few molecules, a plant can determine, is this root my own? Is it from a stranger, a sibling, a competitor? Some plants recognise their own kin and space themselves accordingly. Others, especially in crowded soils, change the angle of their growth to avoid collisions. They may slow down, shift course, or even stop growing altogether in one direction if they detect a strong rival presence. This isn't passive avoidance, it's detection, calculation, and decision. These interactions are especially vital in densely packed environments, Wild meadows, forest floors, fields full of crops. Every plant is looking for room to breathe. And while their leaves might jostle above ground, below, the etiquette is more nuanced. Chemical codes guide roots away from some neighbours and toward others. Some plants even exude compounds that inhibit the germination or growth of other species. Not in a violent way, but in a soft redirection. This space is taken. Scientists call this dance allelopathy, a form of chemical strategy where plants shape their neighbourhood by what they release. We'll explore more of this in a future session. For now, just picture a slow conversation unfolding in the dark. You might imagine the soil as a kind of silent marketplace, full of wandering signals. One root sends out an acid that whispers, "I'm here and I need phosphorus." Another replies with an enzyme, "I can help, but only if you give me sugars." Another, more guarded, simply releases a bitter compound that says, "Please stay away." Roots can even distinguish between signals from the same species and others. Corn, for instance, can grow more aggressively when surrounded by strangers than when surrounded by relatives. It holds back, just a little, for family. Not out of kindness, but out of strategy. There's evidence that these underground chemical exchanges shape the entire ecosystem. Who grows where, which plants thrive, which fade, all beneath the surface, all without a sound, and still, so much of it is uncharted. Soil is notoriously hard to study. It's opaque, messy, and full of hidden variables. But with new imaging techniques and genetic tools, we're slowly revealing just how busy it is beneath our feet. It's not chaos, it's choreography. And all those roots, reaching out across inches and miles, are more than structures. They are sensors, they are scribes. And in their quiet language of molecules, they write the story of who belongs where and why. So the next time you see a patch of garden or forest, don't just look at the canopy. Think of the hidden negotiations below. The roots brushing against each other, the molecules passing from tip to tip, the codes being written, exchanged, rewritten, all in silence. An invisible diplomacy of the deep. Now let's move even deeper into something truly surprising. We've talked about chemical conversations where roots send out molecules like letters carried by the wind. But plants have another way of speaking, one that's faster, more immediate, almost like a reflex. They use electricity. Not quite like us, not with neurons, synapses, or brains, but with pulses, waves, tiny electrical surges that flow through their tissues when something changes. A wound, a shift in light, a brush of touch, a sudden change in temperature. These surges are known as action potentials, the same name used for the electrical signals in our nervous systems. But in plants, they travel more slowly. Instead of milliseconds, they may take seconds. Instead of sparks across neurons, they move cell to cell through structures called plasmodesmata, tiny channels that bridge one cell wall to the next. And yet, despite this difference in speed, the outcome is similar. Information moves. Take the Venus flytrap. When an insect touches one of its trigger hairs, an electrical signal zips through the leaf. The trap snaps shut, not in anger, not in aggression, but because a threshold was reached. Enough signals fired in a short time. The plant decided to act. Or consider the Mimosa pudica, the sensitive plant we met earlier. Touch its leaf, and you'll send a wave of electrical activity cascading down the stem, causing its leaves to fold, not instantly, not blindly, but in a calculated response based on signal strength and duration. Even in ordinary non-dramatic plants, these signals are constantly flowing. If a root detects damage, it sends an electrical message upward. Leaves might alter their chemistry in response. If the light changes suddenly or the temperature dips, electrical waves help coordinate the plant's internal reaction. It's not just localized, it's long-distance communication, plant style. Scientists have discovered that when a leaf is attacked, the entire plant can respond within minutes. Defensive genes activate in distant leaves. Compounds are synthesized, sometimes even before the threat spreads, and the messenger, often it begins as a flicker of electricity. Some researchers suggest that this internal electrical system resembles a kind of distributed awareness, not consciousness, but coordination, a way for a rooted organism to sense danger and share that awareness quickly, even without moving. And then there's something even more curious. In the root tips, those tiny sensitive scouts, electrical activity can resemble patterns seen in neural networks, oscillations, bursts, rhythmic pulses that ebb and flow. The root cap even contains high densities of ion channels, which regulate these signals with striking precision. Stefano Mancuso, a leading voice in plant neurobiology, has gone so far as to suggest that the root tip might function like a brain, not a single centralized command center, but a networked intelligence spread throughout the plant. 1 million small decisions coordinated by a rhythm of flickers and flows. It's a bold idea. Controversial too. Many scientists resist the comparison, rightly cautious about anthropomorphizing. After all, plants are not animals. Their intelligence is not our intelligence. Their lives are tuned to a different tempo. But still, when we see a signal moving through cells, carrying meaning from one place to another, we can't help but wonder, is this not, in its own way, a kind of thought? Or, at the very least, a feeling? So the next time you touch a leaf and see it respond, know that something just passed through its body. A signal, an electric whisper, a decision, measured in seconds, not sparks. And beneath your feet, in the darkness of the soil, those same quiet pulses may be flowing even now, from root to root, from tip to stem, a silent circuitry, tuned not to speed, but to life. Let's follow the roots again, just a little deeper, down where the soil is darker, cooler, and sometimes dry, where water isn't always guaranteed, and yet somehow plants find it. Without eyes, without maps, without moving from place to place, a plant's roots manage to reach water that lies far away. They stretch toward it, not blindly, but with intention. This is the quiet art of hydrotropism, a plant's ability to sense moisture and grow toward it. It's one of the more mysterious abilities in the plant world, because water doesn't have a scent, it doesn't glow, it doesn't hum or vibrate, and yet roots seem to know where it is, sometimes even when it's several centimetres away, hidden on the other side of a dry patch of soil. So how do they know? Researchers believe that roots detect subtle differences in moisture content between one side and another. Certain cells in the root tip swell slightly when exposed to higher humidity, sending chemical and electrical signals that shift the plant's internal balance. Growth hormones are then redistributed, more on one side, less on the other, causing the root to curve toward the source of moisture. It's slow, it's subtle, but it works. Imagine a root winding through the earth, taking a long arcing path, not because it was pushed or blocked, but because it was listening with its body, feeling its way towards something vital. In experiments, scientists have created tiny, maze-like environments where plants must choose a direction. The only difference? One path is slightly moister than the other. Over and over, roots grow toward the wetter side. No trial and error, just detection and choice. This is water foraging, a kind of underground exploration, guided not by sight, but by gradients. Gradients of pressure, of temperature, of moisture, a rich tapestry of invisible clues, read slowly by cells tuned for survival. And this precision isn't just about finding water, it's about using it wisely. Some desert plants develop deep taproots that dive down meters into the earth, reaching reserves others can't. Others send out shallow, wide roots, ready to catch the first drops of rain before they vanish. Plants don't just grow roots randomly, they deploy them with strategy. A seedling in dry soil might pause its root expansion, waiting for better signals. or it may stretch toward a known patch from memory, where moisture was found before. That word, memory, might seem strange here, but some evidence suggests that plants remember patterns in water availability. If given consistent watering from one side, roots will prioritise that zone. If conditions shift, the plant slowly reallocates growth, but not without hesitation. Even the architecture of root systems is shaped by water. A thirsty plant doesn't grow bigger roots everywhere. It grows them where the hope is real, like searching fingers moving slowly through darkness, pausing when the texture of the world begins to change. And while it's hard for us to imagine what that feels like, it helps to think in rhythms. A root tip might take hours to grow a millimetre, but across a day, across a week, it can chart a precise path, not direct, but deliberate, not intelligent in the way we define it, but purposeful all the same. So the next time you water a plant, notice where the soil darkens. That's the message the roots are receiving. That's the whisper they'll follow, cell by patient cell, a soft call to come closer, and somewhere beneath the surface they already are. We often picture plants as peaceful, quiet, cooperative, almost passive in their existence. But beneath the soil, among the roots and stones, a subtler drama unfolds. A slow conflict, a measured resistance. And in this chapter of the underground story, we meet a stranger kind of intelligence, one that defends space not with claws or teeth, but with chemistry. This is allelopathy, a plant's ability to influence and sometimes inhibit the growth of other plants using chemical compounds. To the human eye, it looks like nothing at all. Two plants growing near each other, one thrives, the other wilts. But beneath the soil, messages have been exchanged, warnings issued. Sometimes quiet lines drawn that say, "Not here, not beside me." Take the black walnut tree, Juglans nigra, a towering majestic species found throughout parts of North America. Its leaves are beautiful, its bark rugged and strong, but hidden within its roots and fallen debris is a compound called juglone, a biochemical agent that seeps into the surrounding soil and stifles the growth of many nearby plants. Tomatoes struggle, peppers wither, even apple trees hesitate. Why? Because juglone disrupts cellular respiration in sensitive plants. It makes it harder for them to convert nutrients into energy. Not enough to kill immediately, just enough to exhaust, to exclude. The walnut tree isn't angry, it isn't cruel, but it is careful. It defends the resources around its base, water, nutrients, sunlight above, by quietly reducing competition below. And it's not alone. Sagebrush releases airborne compounds that suppress seed germination around it. Eucalyptus trees drop leaves rich in oils that create poor conditions for competitors. Even sunflowers, those gentle golden giants, exude substances from their roots that can hinder the sprouting of other seeds in their shadow. Not every plant does this, not every soil welcomes it, but in certain ecosystems, allelopathy is part of the quiet balance, ensuring that no single species overwhelms the space, that competition remains at just the right simmer. You might expect this behaviour in fast-growing invaders or desert survivors, but even in lush forests and peaceful meadows, plants sometimes draw boundaries, not with force, but with molecules, not by shouting, but by slowly altering the chemistry of their surroundings. In a way, it's elegant, a kind of ecological negotiation. "I'll grow here," one plant seems to say, "but only if you don't grow too close." And these compounds don't always act immediately. Some persist in the soil long after the plant is gone, ghost messages from former residents, a faded perfume that still tells others to stay away. To us, this might feel like rivalry, like silent warfare, but to the plants, it's simply strategy, an ancient way of shaping their space with patience and molecules, and we too use this knowledge. Farmers and ecologists have learned to rotate crops, with allelopathic properties to suppress weeds. Gardeners know not to plant tomatoes near walnuts. Nature, always experimenting, has long known what we only recently named. So as you walk through a grove or tend a bed of herbs, know that you're not just looking at passive greenery. You're seeing choices, slow, chemical, invisible. The soft rules of coexistence. Not all plants want company, and some express that with scentless sentences written in soil. Let's return once more to the stillness beneath the soil. Down here in this hushed and living dark, we've seen roots grow with purpose, fungi share in quiet generosity, and chemical messages form a language all their own. But there is one more whisper beneath it all, a deeper mystery that lingers like the scent of rain in dry ground. It is the question of memory. Can plants remember? Not in the way we do. They don't recall childhood gardens or the curve of a certain sunrise, but they do retain experience, and they do change because of it. Slowly, quietly, and with surprising consistency. Let's begin with something simple. A young plant growing in shifting soil may find moisture in one direction just once, and stretch its roots toward it. If the conditions hold, it continues to favour that side, even when other paths open later. It's not guesswork, it's response based on previous success, a kind of learned preference. Or imagine a network of trees connected underground through mycorrhizal threads. When one tree experiences drought, it may begin to pull less water and receive more from its neighbours. But long after the drought passes, those patterns of sharing may continue. The network remembers the stress. It doesn't immediately reset. Scientists have seen this in controlled environments. After experiencing a threat, a particular pest or environmental stress, some plants react more quickly the second time. Their chemical defences rise faster. They're primed. They don't just react, they recall. In a remarkable study, Mimosa pudica, the same sensitive plant that folds its leaves when touched, was repeatedly dropped from a short height, gently but without harm. At first it closed its leaves every time, but after several repetitions it stopped responding. It had learned that the drop wasn't dangerous. Even days later, with no further drops in between, the plant remembered. It didn't close. It had habituated. A trait once thought to require neurons and brains was quietly demonstrated in a pot on a lab bench, with nothing but leaves and cells and light. Some call this plant learning. Others prefer the phrase non-neural memory. Whatever the term, it challenges what we think intelligence looks like. It suggests that information can be stored, not in a mind, but in matter, in the shape of proteins, in the folding of cells, in the quiet molecular rhythms of growth and rest. And then there are the networks. In forests, large trees adjust their resource sharing not just based on current conditions, but based on history. Which saplings have survived winters? Which ones have signalled stress before? It's not centralised, it's not controlled, but it is patterned. It is adaptive. Even fungal partners seem to remember which roots offered more sugars, or which ones depleted their resources. Over time their behaviour changes, who they connect with, how much they give. These aren't random fluctuations, they're records, etched in growth, in distribution, in structure. And so we find ourselves wondering, where does memory live, if not just in brains? Could it live in a forest, in the shape of root paths, in the quiet traffic of nutrients, in the chemical tags of a wounded leaf, now scarred but stronger? Perhaps memory is simply what the body keeps, what it holds on to, what it learns not to repeat. And in that case, every plant you see, every tree, every sprout, is not just alive, it is experienced. It holds the shape of storms it's endured, of droughts it has outlasted, of neighbours it has nourished and rivals it has outgrown. It doesn't tell you that story in words, but it tells it all the same. In rings, in scars, in roots that remember where to grow. Let's begin with a leaf that moves, a delicate feathery green that folds inwards when touched, like a secret being tucked away. You might know it as the sensitive plant, but its formal name is Mimosa pudica, bashful mimosa. And it's more than just a botanical curiosity. It's one of the clearest, gentlest windows we have into the question: can a plant remember? Touch its leaves once, and they collapse almost instantly, folding along their spines, drooping as though startled. It's not defence in the usual sense, not spines or toxins, but a movement meant to discourage, to make the plant seem less appetizing, less open, less exposed. But what happens when the stimulus isn't harmful? That's what Monica Galliano, an ecologist with a mind tuned to quiet intelligence, set out to study. In a now famous experiment, she placed Mimosa pudica plants into a soft drop system, where each plant was gently released from a short height, enough to cause movement, enough to make the leaves fold, but never with any damage, never with pain. She repeated the drop, again and again. At first, the plants reacted just as expected, folding at every fall, each time retreating into themselves. But after 4 or 5 drops, something changed. They stopped folding, not because they were tired, not because they were unable. When tapped by hand, they folded again, just as swiftly as before. But to the drop, they had learned. It wasn't dangerous, it wasn't worth the energy. And then came the deeper wonder. When tested again after a day, or even after a week, some plants still remembered. They didn't react. They had retained the lesson. Somehow, in a body without a brain, without nerves, without neurons or synapses, there was a memory. What do we call that? In animals, we call it habituation, the learned reduction of a response to a repeated, harmless stimulus. It's one of the most basic forms of learning. And now, it seemed, a plant was showing the same thing. This moment, when a green leaf chooses not to fold, doesn't shout. It doesn't sparkle, but it ripples through our assumptions, because we've long been told that learning lives in the brain, that memory requires neurons, that intelligence means movement, or at the very least a decision made in real time. And yet, Mimosa pudica, quietly rooted, changed its behaviour based on experience. Not blindly, but precisely. It weighed a pattern and responded accordingly. There was no central command, no flash of thought, just a shift, a withholding, a choice. And perhaps in that pause we glimpse something vast. Not a mind like ours, but something else entirely. Something we're only just beginning to listen for. The sensitive plant in its shyness teaches us not just about botany, but about patience. That intelligence may wear unfamiliar shapes. That memory may live in folds and fronds. And that learning doesn't always need a brain. Sometimes it just needs time. Let's stay with this idea a while longer. The notion that a plant, rooted, silent, brainless, could learn, pushes gently but firmly against how we've been taught to think. We associate learning with eyes that watch, ears that listen, minds that compare and remember. But what if learning isn't about thinking at all? What if it's simply about change, based on what has come before? Let's look at another small but astonishing experiment, one that asks, can a plant learn by association? In 2016, Monica Galliano and her team designed a variation on the famous Pavlov's dog experiment, except there were no dogs, no bells, and no drooling, just pea seedlings, light, and a gentle puff of wind. They placed the pea plants inside a Y-shaped maze, with 2 arms leading outward. They trained the seedlings by exposing them to a soft breeze from a fan, followed by a light shining from the same direction. Plants naturally grow toward light, that's expected. But could they learn to associate the wind with the coming light? Over several days the seedlings were exposed to this pairing. Fan, then light. Fan, then light. And then, on the final day, the test. No light, just the fan. And the results? The seedlings turned toward the breeze, not because they sensed light, but because they anticipated it. The fan alone had come to signal a future reward, a direction worth growing toward. It's important to say, this wasn't a trick of air currents or temperature. The experiment controlled for that. It was the pattern the plants remembered. To associate one signal with another and act based on that prediction is something we typically call conditioning. Not just reacting, but expecting. Not instinct, but experience. It's a gentle kind of learning, far from complex problem solving, far from language or reason. But it is learning, and it happened without a single neuron. What does that mean? For some, it means rethinking what learning truly is, stripping away our human bias, our sense that intelligence must look like us, that it must be quick, that it must speak. But plants have never needed to be quick. They have never needed to speak. They don't need to hunt or flee or memorize faces. Their world moves in light and moisture, in chemical shifts and seasonal changes. Their wisdom is measured in hours, days, even decades, and so their learning moves to that rhythm too. The pea seedling that leaned toward the breeze wasn't pondering its choice. It wasn't contemplating the past. But its body had changed. Its structure had adjusted. Not randomly, but according to a remembered pattern. And in that, there is something remarkable. It means that memory doesn't always need to be made of thought. That learning can be slow, rooted, green. And maybe it means that when we speak of intelligence, we've been listening to the wrong tempo, waiting for words when the answer is movement. So, if a plant can be conditioned, if it can remember which direction light comes from, if it can learn not to waste energy folding its leaves in fear, then perhaps the real question isn't can a plant learn, but how much else are we missing because we were never taught to look down and listen? Let's shift now from memory to something more subtle, something we don't usually associate with plants at all, anticipation, not just reacting to what is, but preparing for what might be. Time, for humans, is a constant companion. We check the hour, we plan our days, we remember yesterday and imagine tomorrow. But plants, rooted, silent, still, seem outside of time, unmoving, eternal, and yet they feel it. In fact, plants may be among the most time-sensitive creatures on Earth. We've already touched on circadian rhythms, internal clocks that let plants rise and rest with the sun, even when kept in darkness. But that's only the beginning. Plants don't just follow the daily rhythm, they can sense and predict patterns over longer timescales, learning when to bloom, when to guard themselves, and even when to rest. Let's return to the world of experiments. In one quiet study, researchers watered plants at the same time each day, always at 10 a.m. The routine was gentle, uneventful, just a bit of hydration in an otherwise ordinary morning. After a few days, the plants began preparing in advance. Before a single drop of water touched the soil, they opened their stomata, the tiny pores on their leaves that allow them to breathe and absorb carbon dioxide. They increased water uptake. They even altered their internal chemistry. All before the water arrived, not in response to light or heat or touch, but to time. And when the researchers stopped watering altogether, something eerie happened. The plants kept preparing at the usual hour for several days afterward, like a memory that hadn't yet faded, a habit shaped by experience. In humans, we call this entrainment, when our internal rhythm aligns with the world around us. It's how we adjust to jet lag, how we anticipate meal times, how we feel the difference between morning and night, even with our eyes closed. Plants do this too, not just with sunlight, but with rainfall, temperature, and the subtle cues of changing seasons. Some desert plants begin root growth days before the rainy season arrives, not when the rain comes, but when the air pressure, humidity, and temperature shift in just the right way. They know, in a sense, what time of year it is, and they act accordingly. Others use the lengthening daylight of spring to trigger blooming, not because they see the sun, but because they measure it, counting the minutes of light as faithfully as any watchmaker. And in each case, what we see isn't reaction, it's prediction. Not the kind that requires thought, but the kind rooted in biology, in molecules that rise and fall with the clock, in cells that anticipate the world before it changes. This ability gives plants a kind of quiet foresight, a chance to prepare rather than simply endure, to meet the future, not with surprise but with readiness. They are not drifting passively through time, they perceive it, feel its passing, mark its patterns, store it in structure. A tree that drops its leaves each fall doesn't wait for cold. It begins weeks before the first frost, sensing the shortening days. A flower that opens each morning doesn't need to be told. It remembers the rhythm. So the next time you feel time slipping by, remember that you're not alone. The garden feels it too. The trees, the grass, the houseplants near your window. They live in time. They learn from it. And in their slow, silent way, they anticipate. Let's pause for a moment now, not to change direction, but to gently look inward. Because as we've wandered through the folds of plant behaviour, memory, conditioning, anticipation, a quiet question has been growing at the edges of it all. What do we mean when we say intelligence? It's a word heavy with expectation. We picture brains, thoughts, problem solving. We imagine eyes scanning for answers, hands shaping tools, minds weighing options. And because plants have none of these things, no neurons, no faces, no movement in the usual sense, we hesitate to use the word. But maybe the problem isn't with the plants. Maybe it's with the question. Intelligence, in many definitions, is simply the ability to solve problems, to adapt to new conditions, to learn from the past. And if we set aside our expectations, if we stop asking plants to behave like animals, we start to notice they do all of these things, just slowly, just differently. Think of a seedling in crowded soil. It doesn't grow randomly. Its roots sense competitors and find open space. Its shoots tilt toward light. It avoids toxins. It stretches toward moisture. It allocates energy based on what it learns from the world around it. That's not instinct. It's strategy, not emotion, but choice. And this choice doesn't come from a centralized brain. It comes from something more distributed, like a network, a forest of decisions made moment by moment, cell by cell. This is what some scientists call decentralized cognition. Each part of the plant, each leaf, each root tip, senses its environment independently. But they also communicate. Through chemical signals, through electrical pulses, through subtle changes in hormone levels. Together, they create a kind of coordinated awareness. Not conscious, perhaps, but undeniably responsive. It's the same kind of intelligence we now recognize in slime molds, organisms with no brain that can still navigate mazes, avoid traps, and optimize routes. Intelligence, it turns out, doesn't require a skull. It requires interaction with complexity, a feedback loop between self and world. And plants have been doing that for hundreds of millions of years. They've survived mass extinctions. They've colonized deserts and frozen tundras. They've formed partnerships with fungi, insects, and even humans. They've invented poisons and perfumes, camouflage and mimicry, solar panels in leaf form. Is that not intelligence? Or are we simply asking the wrong questions, looking for spark when the brilliance is in the slow burn? The philosopher Michael Marder once suggested that we've defined intelligence in a way that makes plants seem unintelligent, because we didn't imagine they could be anything else. But step into a forest, listen to the hush beneath the canopy. Everything around you is adapting, responding, learning, just at a speed and in a language we weren't trained to understand. So maybe it's time to widen our lens, to see intelligence not as something we own, but as something life expresses in 1,000 different ways. And in that new view, The leaf that folds, the vine that climbs, the root that reroots, all become not just alive, but aware, not like us, but deeply, elegantly, quietly aware. Let's return to the ground now, not with answers, but with gentle curiosity. Because whether we call it intelligence or not, there's something remarkable in how plants handle difficulty. Not when things are perfect, but when they're not. When the light is wrong, when the path is blocked, when the water is distant, or the space is tight, or the neighbours are too close, when the world resists them, they don't give up. They solve it, softly, quietly, through a kind of problem solving that doesn't require eyes or memory or maps, but that leads, over time, to better outcomes. Let's begin underground again. Imagine a root growing downward. It hits a stone, a dead end. Now, it could keep pressing forward, wasting energy, burning through precious resources. But that's not what happens. Instead, it pauses, slows, shifts. Some cells stop dividing, others accelerate on one side. The root curves, navigates. It chooses a new path. In real-time imaging experiments, scientists have watched root tips behave like explorers, probing, retreating, trying again. They don't just push through obstacles, they work around them, avoiding dense patches of soil, looping through less resistant terrain. It looks, in time-lapse, like something thinking, like a mind in slow motion. And above ground, the same careful adaptation. Climbing plants, like beans or morning glories, send out tendrils that search for support. If they find a nearby pole or trellis, they begin coiling around it. But if the support is removed, quietly, without force, they begin a new search. They spiral. They reach again. The tendril's movement is guided by a process called circumnutation, a slow, swaying, spiraling search for something to hold on to. And when it finds an anchor, it strengthens, it stabilizes. The plant changes shape in response to success. And even when faced with choice, this pole or that, the tendrils show preference. They grow faster towards certain textures, certain shapes, even certain colours, as if weighing the options. One experiment placed pea seedlings in a maze-like chamber with two possible paths toward light, one short and direct, the other longer and more complex. Given the chance to grow, the seedlings usually selected the better route, the straighter shot. Not by trial and error, but by perceiving subtle gradients of light and adjusting growth accordingly. It's not solving the maze like a mouse or a human would. There's no model in the mind, but there's sensing, comparison, choice. A plant doesn't need to see the whole to find its way through. It just needs to respond moment by moment to what's in front of it. And when it can't go forward, it waits. That too is a kind of strategy. Some seeds, buried too deep or in poor conditions, will delay sprouting for weeks, even months. Not dead, just listening, waiting for a better chance. Timing their emergence with rainfall or temperature, or subtle signals from the soil above. It's not dramatic, not clever in the human sense, but it works, again and again. What we see here is not confusion, not hesitation, but adaptation, trial and adjustment. The slow mind of matter-solving problems, not with thoughts, but with structure. We usually associate problem-solving with speed. But plants show us that speed isn't always the measure of wisdom, that moving slowly doesn't mean not knowing what to do. So the next time you see a vine twisting along a fence or a root curling under a stone, know that you're witnessing something ancient and skilled, not accidental, not automatic, just deeply familiar with the art of trying again. And now we arrive at the quiet heart of the question. We've seen plants remember. We've seen them anticipate, adapt and solve. But we still return, like roots circling a stone, to one lingering thought. Can anything truly learn? Without neurons? It's understandable. For most of us, learning feels tied to the brain, to sparks across synapses, to the flicker of memory forming in grey matter. We measure intelligence in neural activity, in the rapid fire of messages between cells. But plants don't have neurons. They don't have synapses or ganglia, or anything that looks remotely like a brain. And yet, something in them responds to the world in ways we often reserve for minds. How? Let's begin by looking closer at plant signalling. Though they lack nerves, plants do send electrical impulses, slow-moving action potentials that ripple through their tissues, carrying information from leaf to root, root to stem. When a leaf is wounded, when a root finds water, when light shifts just slightly, a signal begins. It doesn't rush, but it travels. And sometimes it triggers change far away from where it began. This is how a whole plant can prepare its defences before a threat even spreads. It's how one root's discovery becomes a shoot's new strategy. The signals move through plasmode stomata, tiny channels that link plant cells, forming a kind of network, not centralised, but connected. Stefano Mancuso, a pioneer in plant neurobiology, argues that this distributed system may be every bit as capable, if not as fast, as our own. He suggests that while we concentrate thinking in a single organ, plants have spread it out. Every root tip, every leaf, every cell participates in a collective process of sensing, comparing, responding. In his words, plants are not immobile animals, they are differently mobile beings, and their intelligence is not missing, just structured another way. There's resistance to this view, of course. Many biologists prefer more conservative terms, signalling, adaptation, physiological response, and those terms are valid, useful, grounded in careful science. But the boundary between response and learning is growing fuzzier. As experiments accumulate, mimosa habituating, pea seedlings predicting, vines choosing supports, the line between reflex and memory begins to blur. If a plant can modify future behaviour based on past experience, if it can distinguish signals, if it can store patterns and act differently later, then we are left with a delicate truth. Maybe neurons are not required for learning. Maybe learning is not the exclusive gift of animals with spines. Maybe it's something broader, something that life, in all its forms, can do when given time, repetition, and need. And that opens a door. It suggests that intelligence isn't a crown worn only by a few species. It's a thread woven through biology, showing up in different textures and tempos, sometimes fast and loud, sometimes slow and green and rooted in silence. So perhaps the question isn't whether plants learn like us, but whether we're finally ready to learn from them, from their patience, from their strategies, from their steady, wordless awareness of the world. Because beneath the soil and within the stems there may be wisdom we've overlooked, simply because it never asked us to listen. Let's begin with a breeze, not a strong wind or a sudden gust, but a soft drift of air curling through a garden, rustling the leaves. It may feel like nothing, just air, just motion, but in that breeze something more may be travelling, something invisible, but potent, a message. Because when a plant is touched, grazed or wounded, it doesn't remain silent. It speaks, not in words or cries, but in chemicals, specifically in delicate clouds of volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. These molecules rise from the leaves into the air, spreading outward in invisible plumes. And though we might not notice them, other plants do. Take a sagebrush shrub. When it's bitten by a caterpillar, it begins releasing a very particular mix of VOCs. Not just a general cry, but a specific message that says, "I'm under attack. Here's what's chewing me." Nearby plants, even of different species, pick up this chemical signal, and many of them don't wait. They begin boosting their own defences, fortifying cell walls, producing bitter compounds, even altering leaf chemistry to make themselves less appetizing. It's not reaction, it's preparation. These VOCs can be incredibly precise. Some studies have shown that different kinds of stress, drought, insects, mechanical damage produce different blends of compounds. Not just something is wrong, but this is the kind of wrongness you should be ready for. And the receiving plants don't just passively accept this information. They process it, they respond with strategy, and they often prioritize which messages matter most. A familiar neighbour might trigger one kind of response, a stranger, another. Some plants even seem to tune out constant signals, much like how you might stop noticing a persistent background hum. And this language of leaves isn't limited to danger. Some VOCs help coordinate flowering, others attract pollinators. Still others signal ripeness, or communicate readiness to form symbiotic relationships with insects or microbes. Even roots release VOCs into the air when disturbed, warning above ground parts to prepare. Imagine standing in a meadow. All around you, these silent exchanges are happening. A tiny tear in a leaf here, a faint pulse of molecules there. It's not chaotic, it's composed, like a green Morse code drifting across fields, forests and flower beds. And we too are part of that story, though we usually don't know it. The smell of freshly cut grass, that sharp green scent, it's a distress call, a chemical shout rising from wounded blades, not meant for us but for neighbouring grass, insects and microbes, a broadcast of vulnerability. And yet to us, it smells like summer. So the next time you catch a whiff of crushed herbs, or brush past a tomato vine and notice its sharp scent, know that you're eavesdropping on a conversation. One shaped not in syllables, but in scent. One tuned not to noise, but to nuance. Because in the green world, speech is vapour, and the air is never empty. Let's imagine for a moment a garden in the middle of a summer drought. The soil is dry and cracked. Leaves hang a little lower than usual. The breeze is warm but doesn't bring relief. All seems quiet, at least to our ears. But this stillness is not silence. Because hidden in the air, in frequencies far above what we can hear, something else is happening. Plants are making sounds. Yes, actual sounds. Tiny pops, clicks, and bursts of ultrasonic vibrations. These aren't cries in the way we understand them. They're not emotional or intentional, but they are real, and they carry information. In recent studies, researchers placed highly sensitive microphones, ones that detect frequencies well beyond human hearing, near plants under stress. When the plants were cut or when they were deprived of water, the microphones picked up short ultrasonic pulses, bursts in the 20 to 100 kilohertz range. High enough that no human would notice, but distinct, detectable, and they came only from plants in trouble. A tomato plant without water, for instance, would emit these pops roughly every few minutes. A tobacco plant might make them more frequently. The sounds differed depending on the kind of stress. A drought voice wasn't quite the same as a cut voice. Which leads us to a remarkable thought. Perhaps the plant isn't just reacting, but signalling. The leading theory is that these sounds come from the xylem, the internal vascular tissue that carries water upward from the roots. When a plant is stressed, and the pressure inside its xylem drops, tiny air bubbles can form and collapse. This rapid tension and release creates tiny vibrations, vibrations that escape into the air as ultrasonic bursts. But here's where things become even more interesting. Other organisms can hear these sounds. Some insects, like moths and beetles, are sensitive to these high frequencies, and it turns out they may actually use them. In one experiment, moths avoided laying eggs on tomato plants that were emitting these ultrasonic clicks. It's as if the moths sensed danger. Perhaps the plant was too dry to support their larvae. Or perhaps a drought-stressed plant is more likely to mount a chemical defense. It may even go further. Some animals, like mice and bats, can detect these frequencies. Could they too be listening to the health of the plants around them? The idea is speculative but deeply compelling. A hidden soundscape all around us, heard only by those who know how to listen. And we, as humans, are just now beginning to tune in. With new technologies, researchers are starting to translate this ultrasonic world, not just recording the sounds, but mapping patterns, comparing healthy plants to stressed ones, trying to understand whether this is merely the sound of suffering or the sound of communication. Is the plant calling out, or is it simply revealing something, passively but truthfully? We don't yet know. But what's clear is this: silence is more complicated than we thought. The absence of audible sound does not mean the absence of a message. In a way, this mirrors our own lives. We often think of silence as emptiness, as lack. But many of the most profound moments are quiet. A look, a stillness, a breath held, a leaf hanging motionless on a branch. But inside, 100 pulses flowing, a quiet tension rising. So the next time you pass by a thirsty garden, or tend to a wilted houseplant, imagine the sound you cannot hear, a whisper above whispering, not a scream, but a signal. And know that, in its own way, the plant is speaking, not with panic, not with pleading, but with the patient urgency of life continuing, even when no one is listening. Let's linger now in the soft tension of response, not just to stress, but to danger. Because while plants don't run, and they don't fight in the way animals do, they do have strategies. When something begins to chew on their leaves, an insect perhaps, or a grazing animal, they don't simply surrender. They signal, and not just within themselves, they signal to each other. Take sagebrush, windswept, aromatic, and more talkative than it appears. When sagebrush is grazed, say, by a hungry caterpillar, it begins to release specific airborne chemicals. These aren't random emissions. They're part of a highly tuned defense system, and nearby plants, even unrelated species, can receive the message. In one experiment, researchers clipped leaves from sagebrush plants to simulate herbivore damage. The neighbouring plants, untouched but within a short distance, began to activate their own defensive genes. They started producing compounds that made their leaves tougher, less digestible, and in some cases toxic to insects. The damaged plant didn't just defend itself, it warned the others, and this warning can be incredibly detailed. Some plants release different chemical blends depending on what's attacking them. The saliva of a caterpillar, for instance, triggers a different reaction than the bite of a beetle or the prick of a thorn. The message carried through the air isn't just "I'm under attack", it's "I'm under attack by this". The nearby plants don't respond blindly, they evaluate. A strong warning may trigger a full chemical response. A weaker one might cause only mild adjustments. The receivers make a judgment based on their own health, age, and the credibility of the source. In some species, these messages even travel internally, from leaf to leaf. A damaged tip sends a signal down the stem, preparing distant leaves for attack. Hormonal messengers, like jasmonic acid and salicylic acid, carry the warning deep into the plant's body, where defences are quietly raised. You might call it a call to arms, but in plant terms the arms are secondary metabolites, tannins, alkaloids, latex, thorns, enzymes, and the call itself is airborne, soft, and full of nuance. There is also a fascinating cost-benefit balance here. Creating defensive chemicals takes energy. It's not free. A plant must decide when the threat is real enough to justify the expense. That's why these signals matter. They help plants respond early and respond intelligently, before the damage becomes overwhelming. In this way, a plant's survival strategy becomes not just individual but collective. Imagine a meadow filled with green bodies, each one monitoring not just its own surface but the air between them. A network of silent sentinels ready to adjust, adapt, and respond, not as isolated individuals but as a community. This sense of mutual defense shows up in other species too. Tomato plants respond to the damage of their neighbours. Corn does the same. Even some grasses begin producing enzymes when nearby plants are harmed. And if the pattern of injury repeats, say, during a particularly active insect season, The entire field may begin to learn the timing, boosting defences earlier with each wave of attack. No alarm bells, no stampedes, just a slow, green fortification. And the attackers? Some of them are learning too. Insects that specialise in certain plants have evolved ways to suppress or avoid triggering these chemical signals. It's a quiet arms race. Leaf versus mandible, molecule versus instinct. But plants are patient. They don't need to outrun. They only need to respond well enough to delay, deter or discourage. And in this gentle war of information, we find something beautiful. A landscape not of passive life, but of coordinated resilience. Not screams, but signals. Not panic, but preparation. And all of it carried on the wind. We've spoken of warnings sent through the air, of plants broadcasting their distress in scents and chemicals. But in every communication, there's more than just a sender. There's also a listener. And sometimes that listener is not the intended recipient at all. This is where the story becomes even more interesting, because plants don't just respond to their own kind. They listen in. They eavesdrop. Imagine a mixed garden. Basil, tomatoes, peppers, sunflowers. A caterpillar chews a tomato leaf. The tomato releases a chemical alarm. But it isn't just the neighbouring tomatoes that perk up. The basil responds. The sunflower does too. Each interprets the signal slightly differently, but many increase their own defences, even though they're not the ones being eaten. It's as if the garden has ears. Studies have shown that plants can distinguish between chemicals released by related species and those from strangers, and they often respond more strongly to signals from their own kin. But unrelated species still listen, sometimes even taking advantage of the information. One particularly fascinating case comes from wild tobacco. When it detects chemical signals from a wounded neighbour, it boosts its production of nicotine, a toxic compound that deters herbivores. But nearby non-tobacco plants, competitors for space and nutrients, will also adjust their chemistry. Some mimic the tobacco strategy. Others redirect energy to growth instead of defence, betting on the idea that the warning doesn't concern them directly. This kind of strategic eavesdropping isn't just passive, it's competitive. It's information used to one's own advantage. But not all responses are selfish. In some intercropping systems, where two or more crops are planted together, scientists have found cooperative communication. For example, planting certain beans near corn can improve both plants' resilience. The beans release nitrogen-fixing compounds. The corn, in turn, responds to the bean's signals by modulating root growth. Less competition, more sharing. In these systems, plants may begin to expect the presence of certain neighbours. When grown repeatedly alongside one another, they often perform better, not just because of nutrients, but because of familiar chemical conversations, and the signals don't stop at the leaf. Roots too are listening. They detect nearby exudates, chemical compounds released by neighbouring roots, and just as with airborne VOCs, root-borne signals can trigger changes in behaviour. A root might slow its growth to avoid crowding a neighbour, or it might ramp up chemical defences if it detects signs of fungal stress nearby. These interactions are not just one-time reactions, they can become patterns, habits even. Plants that have experienced certain neighbours before will often respond to them faster the second time, like remembering the scent of an old friend or a former rival. So the picture becomes richer. Plants are not isolated beings, living silently beside each other. They are participants in a quiet exchange, reading signals not just meant for them, but for anyone paying attention. They listen to friends, they spy on competitors, they learn from strangers, and this awareness isn't emotional, it isn't moral, it's simply biological, life tuned to life, sensitivity shaped by survival. We might call it gossip or instinct, but it's communication all the same, and the garden, in its green hush, becomes a space filled with whispers, shared, stolen, passed along. Information carried not just by the wind, but by experience. And the listeners? They're everywhere, rooted in place, yet always tuned to the world. Let's drift downward again, into the soil, where the quietest voices speak the most often. So far, we've followed the scent trails of leaves and the silent ripples of ultrasonic clicks. But perhaps the most profound conversations of all happen far below, in the dim, tangled depths where roots meet something stranger still. Fungi. And not just any fungi, but a vast, ancient network of mycorrhizae. These delicate threads, thinner than a human hair, weave themselves through the soil, reaching into root cells, forming partnerships that are both intimate and immense. This is not just coexistence, this is conversation. The fungi help plants access nutrients they couldn't reach alone, especially phosphorus, nitrogen and water. In return, the plants share sugars made from sunlight. But this exchange isn't fixed, it's flexible, negotiated, balanced. If a plant is flush with sugar but starved for nitrogen, it sends signals down its roots, molecular hints that adjust the trade. The fungus responds, shifting its offerings. If the plant has enough, it may reduce its contributions or even cut off the relationship. And the fungi don't serve just one partner, they connect many. Across a forest floor, one mycorrhizal network may link dozens, even hundreds of trees and plants. Large trees share with small ones, older plants feed the young, and sometimes, in a moment that feels more like mythology than science, a dying tree will empty its reserves, sending its last sugars to neighbours before it decays. These fungal threads carry not just food, but information. If one plant experiences drought or pest attack, the chemical signals can travel through the network, through the fungus itself, and reach another plant on the other side. That distant neighbour, still untouched, may begin preparing, adjusting its chemistry, bolstering its defences, all because a message arrived, silently. The mycorrhizal network becomes a kind of green internet, slow, organic, decentralised. And though it doesn't transmit ideas or images, it does carry intent, awareness, a sense of shared condition. This isn't altruism in the human sense. Trees don't have feelings. But they are part of systems shaped by millions of years of mutual benefit. A plant that supports its neighbours may, in turn, be supported one season later. A forest where information flows freely is more likely to survive than one where every tree stands alone. And the fungi themselves aren't passive players. They make choices too. If one plant provides more sugars, the fungus may prioritise its services there. If another becomes sick or weak, the network may quietly pull back, not with cruelty, but with the cold efficiency of ecology, giving where growth is possible, conserving where it is not. Even now, scientists are still uncovering the richness of this exchange. What exact signals travel between root and fungus? How far can a warning move? Do fungal networks have memory? Can they learn who is generous, who is not? We don't yet know, but we do know that this partnership is old. Older than flowers, older than fruits, perhaps older than leaves themselves. Fossils from hundreds of millions of years ago show plants and fungi intertwined in exactly this way. A friendship written into the first pages of green life on land. So when you walk through a forest, or even a garden with healthy soil, you are walking over threads of connection. Messages moving beneath your feet. Tiny decisions shaping the world above. And while you may not hear them, they are always speaking. In sugars, in signals, in silence that holds more meaning than sound. So far we've wandered through a world rich with quiet voices, leaves that warn, roots that negotiate, fungi that relay messages through the dark. The air is full of scents we can't name, the soil of signals we can't follow. And the question lingers softly at the edge. Can we ever learn to listen back? For most of human history, the answer was no. Plants were observed, not heard. Their actions measured in inches per week, not moments. They seemed passive, unchanging, more background than being. But that's changing now. With advances in technology, scientists are beginning to tune in, to detect, decode, and even mimic the subtle languages of the green world. And in doing so, they're discovering a new kind of conversation. One not built for us, but still reachable if we listen patiently enough. One method is through electrophysiology, monitoring the tiny electrical signals that pass through plant tissues. With fine electrodes, researchers can track fluctuations in voltage as a plant responds to touch, light, water, or damage. These patterns may not form words, but they mean something. A sudden drop in voltage might signal stress. A gentle wave, adaptation. Some growers are already experimenting with this. In a few high-tech greenhouses, sensors track plant moods by measuring electrical shifts, adjusting light or water in response, not by a fixed schedule, but by the plant's own signals. Another method is bioacoustics. Those ultrasonic pops we explored earlier, the clicks of drought, the quiet cries of a cut stem, are now being catalogued. Machines can detect them, compare them, even begin to sort them into categories. Water stress, mechanical damage, pest attack. Imagine a future where a small sensor in your garden could hear your tomato plant asking for water, not in a human voice, but in a dry, high-pitched whisper above the range of your ears. Then there are chemical sensors, devices that detect volatile organic compounds. Already used in labs, these instruments can analyse the air around a plant and determine what it's saying, whether it's under attack, thriving, or inviting a pollinator. And slowly, gently, these tools are painting a picture. A world that was once silent is now humming with signals, not metaphor, not fantasy, but biology. Some researchers even imagine apps or devices that let gardeners or farmers listen to their plants in real time, translating changes in VOCs, electrical impulses, or acoustic signatures into simple messages. I'm thirsty. I'm crowded. I feel safe. Of course, this raises a deeper question. If we can listen, should we speak back? What would it mean to respond to a plant in its own language? Could we adjust fertiliser not by guesswork but by real-time feedback? Could we grow crops that flourish because we finally asked what they needed? It's speculative, perhaps even idealistic. But the beauty lies not in certainty, but in curiosity. And beyond science, there is something else, a feeling, a shift. To walk through a forest and know that it's not just beautiful, but responsive. To care for a houseplant not as a decoration, but as a quiet presence that learns, remembers, and speaks in pulses and scents. It changes something, not the plant, but you. It slows you down, makes you more attentive, more aware of what else might be alive, not just in body, but in pattern, in rhythm, in relationship. So can we learn to listen back? Maybe not perfectly, maybe not soon, but already the silence is breaking, and the green world is waiting, not to be tamed or decoded, but simply heard. Take a moment now to picture a tree, not a seedling, fresh and eager, nor a sapling with soft bark and swaying optimism, but a tree that has stood for centuries, its trunk wide, textured with the roughness of time, its branches high and sprawling, reaching into seasons it has seen again and again. Snow, sun, storm, bloom. Year after year, from root to crown, it has simply remained. Trees are the elders of the plant kingdom, not just because they're large or old, but because they embody a kind of time we rarely feel, a slow time perspective. Where we measure days and months, they measure decades. Where we remember moments, they hold centuries. Some trees alive today sprouted before our languages took shape, before our maps were drawn. before the stories we tell had words to wrap around them. A bristlecone pine in California is over 4,800 years old. That means it began growing before the pyramids were built, before the wheel was common, before iron had found its fire, and it's still there, twisted and quiet in the thin mountain air. Trees survive by being still, but not passive. Their stillness is a kind of awareness, stretched across time. They grow slowly, not because they are lazy, but because they are wise, measured, efficient, deeply patient. They know how to survive droughts, shedding leaves or pulling back sap. They survive fires, with thick bark and underground reserves. Some species, like the lodgepole pine, even rely on fire, its heat opening their cones to release seeds. What seems like destruction to us is, for them, just another rhythm. They've adapted to wind, bending but rarely breaking, to storms, to snow, to hungry insects, to human changes too, some withering quietly in new heat, others adapting with subtle shifts in flowering and fruiting. And yet, they do all of this without moving, without fleeing. Their strength lies in persistence, not speed. That's something we often overlook, because in our world, quickness is prized. We look for fast results, rapid growth, constant motion. But trees show us another way, where the important work happens slowly, below the surface, or across decades. Where growth is measured not in how far you go, but in how deeply you remain. Their bark thickens with every year. Their roots deepen, their crowns widen, and in their quiet they witness the rise and fall of animals, the changes in rivers, the erosion of stones, the silence after snowfall, the wind through bare branches in early spring. They don't just endure, they store the world within them, and we can see it, if we know how to look. A tree's rings, visible when a trunk is cross-cut, tell the story of its life. Thick rings mean good years, thin rings, hard ones, scars from fire, shifts in colour from drought. Each line a memory, etched not in thought, but in wood. And so a tree becomes a kind of memory tower, standing not just in space, but in time, holding within it the weather, the rhythm, the long conversation between earth and life. So the next time you pass a tree that towers above you, know this. It has stood longer than your oldest memory. It has endured more than a dozen storms you never saw. It has known stillness in ways you haven't yet imagined. And it is not done growing, not done listening, not done quietly being. Let's take a few steps deeper into the forest now. The light grows softer beneath the canopy. The ground feels spongy with moss and years, and the trees standing close together begin to feel less like individuals and more like a family. This isn't just a poetic thought. It's something science is beginning to see too. Something Suzanne Simard, a forest ecologist in British Columbia, helped bring into focus. She called them mother trees. These are the oldest, largest trees in a forest, often towering giants that have stood for centuries. But their strength isn't only in their size, it's in their connections. Through a vast underground network of mycorrhizal fungi, those same delicate threads we explored before, these mother trees form partnerships with the roots of their neighbours. And through these networks, they share carbon, nitrogen, water, signalling molecules, and not just randomly. These trees seem to favour their kin. In Simard's experiments, mother trees preferentially sent carbon to their own seedlings, even when those seedlings were shaded or weak. When one tree was injured or dying, it passed more of its stored resources to its young like a final gift. There's no brain behind this, no maternal instinct. But there is a kind of biological kinship, an evolutionary strategy that increases survival, not just of the species, but of a lineage with memory. These mother trees also play a role in protection. When a tree detects stress, say, from drought or pests, it can send chemical signals through the fungal network to nearby trees, including its saplings. Those trees begin to prepare. They alter their metabolism, produce protective compounds, slow their growth to conserve energy. It's like a neighbourhood alert system, except the wires are fungal threads, the messages are molecules, and the entire forest is listening. Siemens' research showed that removing a single old tree can destabilise an entire patch of forest, not because of the shade it provided or the space it took, but because of the relationships it held. And these connections are long-lasting. A tree planted next to a mother tree grows stronger, even if it's never in direct sunlight. It's nourished in ways we can't see. The old tree doesn't just feed the young one, it guides it, shields it, anchors it. It's a quiet kind of parenting, rooted in patience, rooted in sharing. This doesn't mean forests are perfectly cooperative. Trees still compete for light, for nutrients. But the competition is softened by connection. It's not a battlefield. It's a community shaped by both rivalry and support. And maybe that's what makes it so beautiful. That in the darkest, deepest layers of the forest, where the soil is damp and the air smells like rain and rot and slow growth, there are relationships we never knew to look for. Families without faces, support without speech. A tree, we once thought, was just a tree. Now, we see that it may be a mother, a neighbour, a quiet architect of survival. So when you walk through a forest and feel something ancient around you, know this: you're not just walking through life, you're walking through connection, root to root, ring to ring, tree to tree. Let's pause now beneath a branch heavy with leaves, noticing the dappled light, the cool shade, the soft rustle. To us it's just another summer afternoon, but to the tree it's something more. It's data. Because trees don't just grow with the seasons, they remember them. Not in the way we do, not with mental images or remembered warmth, but with a kind of slow, embodied wisdom, a biological memory written in cells and bark and sap flow, a memory that lets them know when to wake, when to wait, when to grow, and when to rest. Consider the coming of spring. To us, the first buds feel like a surprise, but a tree has been preparing for weeks, measuring the slow increase in daylight, tracking the temperature of the soil, not just the warmth of one day, but the average across many. A subtle calculation done in cells. Some species won't open their buds until they've counted a minimum number of cold hours in winter, ensuring they don't bloom too early, only to be burned by a late frost. Others combine signals: light length, soil warmth, and internal chemistry. The result is not just a response, it's a strategy. Trees in different regions have evolved different thresholds for these seasonal triggers. A cherry tree in Kyoto blooms weeks earlier than its cousin in Sweden, even under the same sun. This isn't chance. It's long-term adaptation, memory encoded across generations, shaped by local rhythms. And trees don't only remember time and seasons, some track multi-year cycles. They produce seeds heavily one year, then almost none the next, a rhythm known as masting. Scientists still debate why this happens, but it seems tied to weather patterns, stored resources, and even communication with other trees nearby. It's as if the forest sometimes decides, together, this is a good year for fruit. Next year, we rest. That too is a kind of memory. An oak might know that the previous year's drought makes it unwise to spend energy on acorns. A pine might delay growth after fire, letting nutrients return before sending new shoots. This awareness is held not in thoughts, but in thresholds, tiny chemical gates that open only when the conditions match. What experience has taught them is safe. Even droughts leave a trace. In tree rings, in root patterns, in the timing of bud break or the thickness of the leaves. If you looked closely enough, you'd find the echo of dry summers still shaping how a tree grows decades later. And as climates shift, so too do these memories. Some trees are adjusting, changing their timing, sprouting earlier, dropping leaves later, but others struggle to keep up, clinging to old schedules in a warming world. Memory, in this case, becomes both a strength and a limitation. Still, the effort is there. The tree is listening, comparing, adapting, all without a nervous system, all without moving an inch. It knows the timing of the birds, the buzzing of pollinators, the usual patterns of wind and rain. It sets its calendar by stars and frost and unseen cycles, and when something is off, it feels it, not in panic but in quiet hesitation, a delayed leaf, a shorter bloom. So when you stand beside a tree in spring, or sit beneath one in fall, know this: it has not simply awakened, it has decided, based on years of signals, on what has been, and on what might be. Its leaves are not just leaves, they are the visible tips of a long, slow, silent remembering. If you stand in the middle of a forest and look up, past the soft flutter of leaves, the gentle sway of branches, you'll notice something curious. The treetops, though vast and overlapping, often stop just short of touching. There are gaps, not empty, but intentional. Like shy hands held near but never quite meeting. This phenomenon has a name: crown shyness. In many tree species, especially tall ones like certain pines and eucalypts, the outermost branches avoid contact with their neighbours. The canopy becomes a patchwork of greens and sky, curved, flowing spaces, like lace held against the heavens. No one fully understands why this happens, but several ideas have emerged, each suggesting a form of etiquette in the race for light. One possibility is abrasion. As branches sway in the wind, they may knock into each other. Over time, the trees learn to grow just far enough apart to avoid the repeated stress. A slow adjustment, season by season, until the boundaries settle into respectful distance. Another idea is light optimization. By keeping a bit of space between crowns, more light filters through to the lower branches and even to the forest floor. In this view, crown shyness becomes a kind of collaborative spacing, not full cooperation, but a recognition of shared space. And then there's pest prevention. Some scientists believe that gaps between trees help reduce the spread of insects or fungal infections. Like not touching hands in flu season, the distance becomes a quiet form of care. Whatever the reason, the result is striking. Trees, competing for the same sunlight, seem to do so without greed. They reach upward, yes, but they pause too. They find balance. They find form. And this behaviour isn't just in the sky. Underground, roots often do something similar. Some species send roots away from their own kind to avoid crowding. Others grow in patterns that leave just enough space for each other. It's not always gentle. Some trees still outcompete, overtake, dominate. But even in competition, there is structure, an unspoken choreography of growth. We tend to frame nature as a battle. Survival of the fittest, winner takes all. But forests often show a different truth, that survival can be about adjustment, about leaving room, about stretching only as far as you must. Even among the tallest trees, where every extra inch of height might mean more light, there is no frantic reaching, no chaos, just upward motion tempered with awareness, and the result is beauty. Crown shyness turns the canopy into a living mosaic, every tree its own tile, every gap a gentle reminder that in growth, as in life, boundaries matter. It's not weakness to leave space, it's wisdom. So the next time you walk beneath tall trees and glimpse those delicate sky rivers winding between the crowns, pause. You're seeing negotiation. You're seeing grace. You're seeing what it looks like when life chooses respect over conquest. We often think of death as an ending, but in the forest it's just a change in form, a transition, not a disappearance. When a tree falls, whether from age, wind, lightning, or the slow decay of time, it doesn't vanish from the story of the woods. In many ways it becomes even more generous, even more alive, in a different way. This is the quiet legacy of the nurse log. A fallen tree lies on the forest floor, its trunk thick with age. To us, it may look like just a log, a piece of debris, but look closer. Already life is gathering. Moss, soft and spongy, wraps the bark. Tiny fungi begin to thread through the wood. Insects burrow in. Beetles, ants, worms, all arriving, drawn by shelter and food. Soon, seedlings appear, sprouting not from the ground, but from the log itself. Their roots find anchor in the decaying fibres. The log, once vertical and towering, now nurtures from below. It offers nutrients, calcium, nitrogen, phosphorus, all released as the wood softens and breaks apart. It holds moisture like a sponge, protecting the young from dry spells, and it lifts them just slightly off the soil, high enough to catch a bit more light, to avoid the competition of the crowded floor. In the Pacific Northwest, entire forests have been shaped by this process. You can see rows of tall trees growing in neat lines, each one rooted where a fallen ancestor once lay. The log is long gone, returned to soil, but its shape remains, a shadow of support. And it's not just trees that benefit. Birds nest in hollow logs. Amphibians shelter in the cool, damp shade. Fungi bloom in bursts of delicate colour. Some species of salamander are found almost exclusively in the decaying hollows of old trees. The fallen trunk becomes a village, hosting life of every scale. And underneath, the roots that once drew water and held earth in place now become tunnels, channels, food for microbes. Even in decomposition, the tree still structures the world around it. This is a form of generosity we rarely talk about. Not giving while standing tall, but giving in collapse, offering space, offering substance, offering rest. The process is slow. It can take decades for a large tree to fully decompose. In that time, its body will host generation after generation of life. Its bark will peel back like paper. Its core will soften to soil. Its identity will blur, until it is forest, no longer tree, and yet it will still be part of everything that follows. So when you walk through a forest and see a fallen giant, don't look away. Don't rush past. Pause. You're seeing the continuation of care. A body once shaped by sunlight now offering its shade. A trunk once reaching upward now serving those who begin below. A teacher turned bed. A parent turned cradle. Nothing in the forest is wasted. Even stillness has its part. Even endings feed the roots of new beginnings. Now let's stand still beside a tree. Not because it needs us to, but because sometimes we need it. Feel the roughness of bark beneath your fingers, the age etched into every ridge and wrinkle. If you stay quiet long enough, you may begin to sense what's hard to put into words. That this tree has seen more than you ever will. It has stood through decades, maybe centuries of change. Snowfall and wildfire. Rain that came too soon. Seasons that forgot to end. Generations of animals resting beneath its branches. People too, some who came to sit, others to carve their names. And in its stillness the tree has remembered it all. Not in stories, not in speech, but in rings. Each year a tree adds a layer just beneath its bark, a thin circle of new wood that marks its growth. In good years the ring is wide, sunlight was plentiful, water abundant. In dry years it narrows, storing the memory of strain. Fires leave dark scars. Droughts linger in dense, tight bands. Insects, storms, even human touch. Each leaves a signature, faint but true. And taken together, these rings form a timeline, a wooden diary, a quiet archive of the world as it passed. Scientists use this to study climate history. It's called dendrochronology, the science of tree rings. By reading the patterns in old trunks, researchers can map centuries of weather patterns, pinpoint droughts that shaped civilizations, trace volcanic eruptions through their impact on growth. find echoes of distant events in the quiet thickness of a single ring. A tree, in this way, becomes more than a plant. It becomes a witness, not just to storms and sunlight, but to us. There are trees still standing today that sprouted before our ancestors arrived in the region. Trees that watched the rise and fall of empires. Trees that saw forests cut down around them, cities grow, fences tighten, lights shift, and they remain. Not because they were untouched, but because they adapted. They leaned with the wind. They healed over their wounds. They grew, slowly, patiently, insistently. When we stand beside one of these elders, we are not just touching bark, we're touching time, a record of years held in silence, a presence that didn't need to speak to be heard. And here's something beautiful to consider. Every tree, even the young ones, carry the wisdom of the old, in their genetics, in their form, in the shape of their leaves and the pace of their bloom. They inherit not only what the world is, but what it was. So perhaps, when you feel overwhelmed by the speed of your days, when headlines rush, when minutes blur, you can return to a tree, not for answers, but for perspective. It has waited out storms far greater than yours. It has bent and stood again. It has kept growing even through the leanest years. Its wisdom isn't loud, it's quiet, layered, and deeply, deeply rooted. Let's begin this final exploration with a gentle question, one that may settle softly in your mind like a seed. What if thinking doesn't look like us? What if intelligence exists not in sparks and synapses, but in the slow unfurling of a leaf, in the turning of a root toward water, in the way a sunflower follows the sun without ever seeing it? For much of history, we've framed thinking through our own mirror. We look for minds that move quickly, that talk, react, remember in the way we do. And when we don't see those things, we call the other silent. But silence is not emptiness, and slowness is not absence. Plants don't speak, but they respond to light, touch, gravity, sound, heat, and time. They solve problems, remember experiences, communicate with neighbours. Yet because they do it without a brain, we often dismiss it, as if the only valid mind must be carbon copied from our own. But biology doesn't owe us similarity, it only owes us honesty. In nature, thinking might emerge wherever life meets challenge. And for a rooted being, a life that cannot walk away, awareness takes on a different rhythm. Instead of escaping danger, plants anticipate it. Instead of chasing food, they grow toward it. Instead of storing knowledge in neurons, they store it in change, in altered chemistry, adjusted growth, remembered light. They may not know in the way we know, but they do. When a vine reaches for a support beam, it evaluates options. When a mimosa stops folding its leaves after repeated harmless drops, it shows habituation. When a seedling turns toward a memory of light, it acts with something very much like intent. And here's where the humbleness comes in. Perhaps we're not here to judge what is or isn't intelligence. Perhaps we're here to notice, to be willing to see thinking in unfamiliar shapes, a mind without a skull, a decision without a nervous system, a conversation that moves through air, soil, and fungus. It may feel strange, but it's also freeing. Because if we can recognize intelligence in something so different from ourselves, so green, so still, so quiet, then maybe our definition of life, of presence, of meaning becomes wider. It makes room for other ways of knowing, for other timelines of thought, for the possibility that we're surrounded not by lesser things, but by differently brilliant ones. And that idea, that shift, is not just scientific, it's emotional, philosophical, even, in a quiet way, spiritual. It doesn't demand worship, just attention. It doesn't demand belief, just wonder. So tonight, as we move gently into this last part of our journey, you're invited to loosen the edges of what you thought you knew. not to forget it, but to stretch it, to make room for the kind of mind that moves in chlorophyll, not thought, in fibre, not flash, and in that room, who knows what you might begin to hear. Now that we've gently opened the door to new kinds of intelligence, let's pause a moment and look at the lens we've been using all along, because science, for all its rigour and wonder, is still shaped by humans, and we, with our walking limbs and speaking mouths, have long measured the world by what looks like us. For much of history, the study of intelligence was reserved for creatures with brains, preferably large ones, housed in skulls, capable of movement, reaction, expression. We marvelled at dolphins, crows, chimpanzees. We looked for tools, for language, for mimicry and memory, and plants. Plants were background, scenery, beautiful, yes, useful, certainly, but alive in the way a clock is alive, turning in place, repeating its motions, never surprising us. Even in botanical sciences, this view lingered. Behaviour was something animals did. Plants were passive. A leaf curled because of moisture. A flower opened because of light. But never because of choice. Never because of an internal sense of change. This wasn't malice. It was a kind of bias of speed. We're tuned to notice motion on our timescale. A squirrel darting. A dog tilting its head. A human raising an eyebrow. But plants move in hours, in days. Their decisions take place in rhythms we often miss, like watching a glacier and saying it never shifts. This speed bias pairs with another, the bias of anatomy. Without a brain can there be thought. Without eyes can there be perception. Without nerves can there be feeling. Many assumed number, but assumptions are slippery things. They feel like truths because they're familiar, because we've always believed them, because we rarely pause to ask why we hold them. It took time, decades, for science to begin questioning its own lens. Why did we only study animals in intelligence labs? Why were plants only tested for growth, not behaviour? Why did we dismiss responses in plants as automatic while calling similar ones in animals reflexes? Even today, the field of plant neurobiology remains controversial. The very term, neurobiology, raises eyebrows because plants have no neurons, and yet their systems show electrical signalling, calcium flux, memory-like patterns, and adaptive learning. So what do we call that? And more importantly, why does the name matter? Because names shape thought. They define what we think is possible. If we call a plant's behaviour chemistry, we study its reactions. If we call it intelligence, we study its intentions. But maybe in the end, both are true. Maybe chemistry is intelligence, when used in patterns, when shaped by need, when remembered and revised. And maybe it's time we admit something simple, that science, though brilliant, can carry the weight of old metaphors, that what we once overlooked was never lacking. We were just looking through the wrong frame. And here, in the quiet space of night, that realization feels less like an error and more like a soft unfolding. Like finally noticing that the garden you've walked past every day has always been talking, you just hadn't heard it yet. Let's imagine for a moment a different kind of mind. Not a single glowing centre, not a brain pulsing inside a skull, but a web, spread out, branching, rooted, a mind without a head, an intelligence made of many points working together, decentralised, deliberate, quiet. This is the model that's beginning to emerge in plant science, a vision of cognition that doesn't revolve around a brain, but around networks. Because plants may not have neurons, but they do have systems of information processing. At the tip of each root, for instance, is a structure called the root apex. It's sensitive, responsive, capable of detecting gradients of moisture, nutrients, chemical signals, even gravity. It's been called a root brain, not because it thinks in thoughts, but because it makes decisions. It chooses direction, it prioritizes resources, It adjusts its growth in real time based on new information. And here's where it gets interesting. Each root tip does this independently, but also as part of the whole. Like the nodes of a vast system, each one responds locally but contributes globally. Together, they create behaviour. It's not unlike how artificial neural networks function, like the ones we use in computing and machine learning. These systems aren't smart because any one unit is brilliant, but because of how the units are connected, how they share data, how they learn through feedback, trial and pattern recognition. And in plants, this kind of distributed intelligence appears again and again. A leaf detects light and tells the stem to shift. A branch senses shade and angles itself outward. The canopy adjusts its growth to maximize photosynthesis, not as a command from above, but as a mosaic of small decisions aligning together. No center, no throne, just communication. This model may feel strange to us, because we're used to thinking of intelligence as hierarchical, a leader, a core. But what if intelligence doesn't always need a crown? What if in some cases the crown is the forest itself? A tree, a bush, a creeping vine. Each may house an awareness that flows through its whole body. Not fast, but thorough. Not loud, but responsive. This kind of intelligence doesn't boast, it adapts. And perhaps it offers us a lesson. In our own designs, we're beginning to shift away from central control toward network systems. Cities, software, even social movements. Many thrive best when built like plants, flexible, distributed, responsive to change from many directions at once. Maybe nature has always understood this, not by calculation, not by intention, but by evolution. Because when your life depends on the soil beneath you, and you cannot run or hide, the best intelligence is the kind that reaches in all directions, the kind that listens everywhere at once. So when we picture a mind, let's allow the image to soften, let it sprawl like ivy, let it branch like roots, let it spread across a leaf's veins humming in green. It may not look like us, but it may be more familiar than we think. In a world that praises speed, of thought, of progress, of reaction, slowness is often mistaken for weakness. We marvel at quick decisions, fast growth, instant answers. A computer that calculates in a fraction of a second seems more intelligent than a tree that takes a full day to turn toward the sun. But what if slowness is not a flaw? What if it's a form of strength? Because in the still lives of plants, every choice is deliberate. Every adjustment is a commitment. There is no rewinding a growing root, no instant retreat. The decisions must be good because they are costly to undo. And so, plants wait. They measure. They listen for longer. Slowness becomes a kind of depth. It allows a tree to sense changes in temperature, not hour by hour, but season by season. To learn when spring truly begins, and not be fooled by a few warm days in January. To remember drought not just from this year, but from 3 years ago. This slow wisdom shapes forests. It helps trees avoid false starts. It lets them sync with the long rhythms of pollinators, birds, and fungal partners. It makes them resilient. We might say, they are not hasty thinkers. They are time-shifting teachers. In their presence, we begin to feel it too. That pace. You don't rush past a redwood. You stop. You breathe. You slow to meet its tempo. And when you do, you start to see more. The way the leaves quiver in wind that seems still. The way the roots, unseen, cradle the stones beneath them. The way the forest speaks in shadows, in dampness, in time. Even our tools must adapt to perceive it. Time-lapse videos condense hours into seconds, revealing what was always there but hidden behind our own haste. A vine circling, choosing. A sunflower tracking the arc of the sky. Roots navigating like explorers through soil. Slowness is not silence. It is simply too gentle to interrupt. And maybe that's a kind of brilliance, one we're only just beginning to value. Think of how we teach children, by repetition, by patience, by presence. Think of how wisdom often comes not in youth's quick answers, but in age's quiet reflections. Think of how we feel when someone truly listens, not to reply, but to understand. That's what plants do. They don't speak to outpace, they don't rush to perform, they unfold, and in doing so invite us to unfold too. Maybe this is what intelligence can be, not just the power to calculate, but the ability to wait, to attend, to sense deeply enough to change direction only when the time is right. So perhaps slowness isn't the absence of speed. Perhaps it's the presence of attention stretched across time. And perhaps, in learning from plants, we remember something long forgotten, that life doesn't have to be fast to be wise. It only has to be present. If you close your eyes and picture something intelligent, chances are it moves, quickly, with purpose. A bird weaving through branches, a dog responding to a command, a person thinking, frowning, choosing. But here is where plants ask us to rethink again. Because while we've come to equate motion with awareness, perception doesn't always need legs, or a face, or a voice. Sometimes it's found in stillness. At first glance, a plant appears unmoving, static, barely more dynamic than the stone it grows beside. But we know now that this stillness is an illusion, a matter of perspective and pace. With the help of time-lapse photography, we see what has always been true: a tendril reaching for support, a leaf turning gently toward the sun, a root avoiding toxins curving in the soil with a deliberateness we didn't expect. There's motion, yes, but more than that, there is choice, sensed, processed, expressed. And that choice begins with perception. Plants are exquisitely sensitive. They detect light in multiple wavelengths, even differentiating between red and far red to sense not just sunlight, but shade. They feel touch, vines wrapping, mimosa leaves folding. They register gravity, temperature, electrical fields, water gradients, even sound vibrations. They are, in a quiet way, fully awake. And because they don't move in the way animals do, their perceptions are rooted, both literally and metaphorically. They don't chase information, they let it come to them. Like monks in stillness, they listen to the world by absorbing it. Think of a sunflower field, each head turning through the day, not at random, but in rhythm with the sky. That movement is small, almost imperceptible, but it's tuned, responsive, purposeful. Or consider the Venus flytrap snapping shut in milliseconds, only after confirming multiple touches. A logic gate of leafy flesh. Fast, yes, but based on stillness, waiting, feeling, deciding. This is perception through anchored awareness. And when you think about it, humans do something similar when we sleep. Still, quiet, eyes closed, yet our brains are sorting, storing, sensing the patterns of our day. Maybe plants live in that state more constantly, not dreaming, but dwelling, in place, in pattern, in the soft conversation between soil, sky, and self. Their stillness is not absence of life. It's a form of life, one that doesn't rush to respond, one that stretches response across time. So perhaps next time you sit beside a tree or rest your hand on a houseplant's leaf, you'll pause, not expecting movement but acknowledging presence. That in its stillness it is perceiving, not with eyes but with photoreceptors, not with ears but with vibration-sensing cells, not with skin but with every surface tuned to the world. Stillness here becomes depth, a kind of wisdom that listens longer than we ever learn to, and in that listening finds a different way to know. Let's imagine for a moment that we've heard the green world clearly, that we've listened, truly listened to what the plants have been whispering through leaves and roots and rhythms all along, that we've come to accept, not as fantasy or fable, but as quiet fact, that plants are not unaware, that they perceive, that they decide, that they learn and remember in ways we're only beginning to understand. If we accept this, then what changes? This final question isn't about guilt. It's not about drawing lines between right and wrong in the soil. Plants are not asking us to stop gardening, or stop farming, or stop pruning a tree. But perhaps they're asking us to notice, to treat their lives not as passive materials but as present ones, to shift from ownership to relationship. Because when we recognize intelligence, or something like it, even in a form so different from ours, it becomes harder to treat that life as purely functional. That doesn't mean we stop using plants. We can't. We eat them, we wear them, we breathe because of them, but we can change how we interact with them, how we grow them, how we harvest and care and tend. In many indigenous cultures, this respect has always existed. Plants were seen as teachers, as kin, as elders in their own right. A tree was not a commodity but a participant. A field not just a crop, but a cycle. Modern science, slowly catching up, is now weaving itself back into that circle of reverence. And the ethics that arise here are subtle. They don't shout. They whisper, just like the roots do. They ask, what does it mean to garden with awareness? To notice how a plant leans, how it times its bloom, how it adjusts when a neighbour is removed. What does it mean to harvest mindfully, not just mechanically? To understand that a plant pulled from the ground is part of a wider network, that it had connections we can't see, and how might farming change if we listened more carefully? Could crops thrive better when grown in patterns that honour their communication? Companion planting, polycultures, shared fungal webs. These aren't radical demands, they're gentle shifts, from exploitation toward collaboration. And maybe, most of all, they offer something for us, not just the plants. Because when we begin to see intelligence in something slow, something quiet, something still, we start to value those qualities in ourselves too. We learn to pause before acting, to observe before assuming, to tend, not just take. In the presence of a leaf, we might begin to feel reverence not as mysticism, but as a simple form of listening, of paying attention, and in paying attention we become more rooted, more whole, more capable of living with, not just on this earth. So if tonight you step outside and the wind stirs in the trees, or if you brush your hand across a fern by the window, or watch a houseplant lean gently toward the light, remember, it is not just there, it is being, and you in witnessing it are part of that quiet unfolding too. Take a deep breath, if you like. Let it be soft, unhurried. Let it rise through your chest like morning mist over a quiet field. And now, exhale. In that breath, you've just taken part in a conversation older than speech. You've exchanged with a leaf somewhere. Maybe many. Not with words, but with presence. Because the air you breathe, the oxygen that moves gently through your lungs, comes from the quiet work of plants. Tiny green cells in leaves and stems and grasses and fronds, catching sunlight and turning it into life, into sugar, into breath, into a gift. And in return you offer carbon, not waste, not burden, but a gift of your own. Something plants use to build roots, to stretch upward, to keep growing. This is not a transaction. It's not a deal. It's a rhythm, a shared breath. You and the tree are not separate. You and the houseplant on your shelf. You and the algae blooming far out in the sea. You're connected in every inhale, in every quiet sigh before sleep, in every soft exhale when the day ends and the lights go low. Some might call this interdependence, others interbeing, a word from the poet and a monk Thich Nhat Hanh, who reminded us that nothing truly exists alone. The tree cannot grow without the fungi beneath it. The fungi cannot thrive without the sugars from the tree. You cannot breathe without the green, and the green cannot exist without the breath of others. We tend to think of ourselves as separate from nature. We live in houses, we ride in vehicles, we scroll through glowing rectangles. But even in these moments, right now wherever you are part of the forest. You're made of water that once flowed through roots, carbon that once floated through leaves, calcium that once lay in soil, cradled by earthworms held in bark. You are not just in nature, you are of it. And so, even if you are far from the woods, even if your day has been all concrete and noise and hurry, you can return right now, in this breath. With each inhale, feel the gift of green life. With each exhale, feel the offering you give in return, slow, gentle, shared. You don't have to try. You already belong. Just as a fern belongs to the forest floor, just as moss belongs to stone, just as dusk belongs to the turning of the day, and perhaps, just perhaps, the trees breathe differently when you're near. Not because they recognize you by name, but because you are part of the pattern, the air, the soil, the rhythm. Let that settle. Let it soften you. You are part of the forest, and the forest is always here, even in the dark, even in stillness, even in sleep. Now that you've felt your breath settle, and perhaps noticed the green thread that gently ties you to the world around you, let's turn our gaze downward, not with your eyes, but with your attention. Let it sink, slowly, into the ground. Because beneath your feet, beneath the forests and fields and gardens, there's another world. One we rarely see, but one that holds more than roots. It holds memory. Imagine the soil, not as dirt, but as a living, breathing network, a cradle of endless conversations. Roots stretch through it like fingers. Mycelial threads, those impossibly thin strands of fungi lace through the earth, connecting plant to plant, tree to tree. A web so fine that a single teaspoon of healthy soil can contain several miles of fungal filaments. This is the world beneath the world. And in this world, plants don't stand alone. They are part of a vast, murmuring community. They send nutrients to one another. They warn each other of pests. They offer sugar to fungi in return for minerals. They choose. They negotiate. They remember. And all of it, every gesture of generosity, every quiet alert, every slow agreement, happens below, in the dark, in the quiet. It's humbling, isn't it? To realize that while we hurry above, while we fill our days with noise and motion and light, there is a whole intelligence moving beneath us. Not in circuits or screens, but in dampness, in stillness, in threads of life we can't see, but that hold the forest together. And perhaps hold us too, because our bodies come from this soil, our food grows from it, our ancestors returned to it, our future still depends on it. The roots beneath the trees are not just anchors, they are memory keepers. They remember where the water once ran, where fire once passed, where kin once stood, and in the mycelial network, this fungal mesh that some call the wood wide web, there is a kind of shared remembering, a slow echo of experience passed not in stories, but in sugars, in signals, in structure. What touches the soil touches us. Even if you live in a city, even if your feet rarely press bare into earth, you're still part of that story, still connected by every bite you eat, every breath you take, every bit of warmth that roots itself inside you when you see something green. The forest is not just above the ground, it's below, it's around, it's within. And when you begin to feel that, you start to realize that nothing is ever truly alone. The leaf belongs to the branch belongs to the trunk belongs to the roots, and the roots belong to everything. Even now, as you lie still or sit quietly or listen in the dark, there are roots growing somewhere, reaching, listening, not fast, not loud, but certain, and they remember. And now, at the end of this long and quiet journey, you can rest. There's no more to understand, no more to hold in your mind. Only a soft exhale, like a leaf folding in for the night. If you listen closely, beneath the hum of your room, the rhythm of your own breath, you might still feel the forest. Not as something distant or wild, but as something familiar. It might be in the hush, in the coolness that comes just before sleep. In the slow rhythm your thoughts have taken on as the evening deepens. There's a comfort in knowing that the trees are still standing, that the roots are still reaching, that somewhere out there a fern is uncurling, and somewhere else a sunflower is tucking in its golden face as dusk settles. You don't need to do anything right now. You don't need to be anyone other than who you are. The world will continue spinning, the plants will continue growing, and your place among them is already assured, because you are part of this quiet green story. You always have been. From the breath you draw to the food you eat, from the wood that frames your walls to the cotton that touches your skin, the plant world is never far. Even in darkness there is life around you. Even in silence something is listening. Even in stillness you are part of a great breathing growing whole. So let yourself feel held in that. Let your breath be slow. Let your limbs grow soft and heavy. Let your thoughts drift like seeds in a breeze, free to land or not. There is no hurry. You are safe here. You are part of something ancient. You are allowed to rest. And when you sleep, the green world will go on, quiet, patient, alive in its own steady rhythm. The leaves may not close their eyes, but they know the dusk, and they know you. So now, gently, let yourself slip into that stillness, not with effort, not with will, just like a tree lets go of a leaf, quietly, naturally, as part of what is.